You ready, Dave? Assume he is.
Yep, we're ready. We're ready.
Okay. Well, folks, thanks for joining us tonight. It's a significant moment. Tomorrow will be the 60th anniversary of the assassination of JFK, and as you know, I've been involved with this a long time. We just had a big conference in Dallas this weekend, and Project JFK CSI will be joining us tonight on Zoom. They're going to give some presentations on Zoom after us. We got some people there. We're going to try to pull it all together. Appreciate your time tonight. I know we got some students here, and as promised, there is pizza in the hallway. So we promised the students we do that, and who knows, there might be some extra for those that are not students. But no questions tonight, Seven. Not till the end, man. Okay, all right. Save it for the end. So we're going to get started, and I picked this presentation the moment we are in because I think it is an important moment. Someone, involved in history like myself is always concerned about our history and how we hopefully get it correct. And that's, part of the thing that so many of us have been involved in this story for so long have wanted to do. I believe there are three converging factors coming into this last year, heading into that 60th anniversary mark, which is always something people look at. They look at watermarks 30, 40, 50, 60 years. It seems hard to believe. So I think that's always important. Many of you have seen and heard about the release of classified documents associated with the case that are still being withheld, though a number of them had been released. I mean, we'll be talking about that, and that there still are 4,000 documents, for whatever reasons, are still withheld by the United States government from the American people 60 years after the fact. And then there's been a lot of things associated with a Secret Service agent who came forward with a story, a very explosive story, named Paul Landis, that seemed to capture the attention of the media, maybe like nothing in years associated with this story. So we'll just kind of go from there. And and in addition to that, it's also the 60th anniversary of Olney Central College this year, correct? That's another converging element. And Deanna Ratz, our PR person up there, was kind enough to give a quote from one of the individuals that were just talked to about the 60th anniversary at college. It says, one thing I always remember about that fall is the assassination of JFK. Everyone was a member of the class, could tell what they were doing on campus when they heard the news. I know I was in the library at the time. That came from the first class, Louis Valbert of OCC's first class. And that's not just for college students. It was for a lot of Americans, obviously. Okay. So let's go into those converging elements that I want to talk about. And there's, we go back really to the beginning in 2017, the government was compelled by Congress back in 1992, I believe, to go on a 25-year time track where they were supposed to release all classified documents still withheld on the JFK assassination, unless the President of the United States would get in the way of that. The National Archives involved in that process and supposed to do it. But it's still been it's been a process. There have been some released, some still withheld. And I think with each rolling release and the limitations on it, I think there's become more public scrutiny about why, what's the point 60 years later? What could be in danger to national security after 60 years? That's a valid question that everyone could ask. But and I think the media, maybe to its semi-credit, as in terms of moving the needle, has gained a little more attention in this and put more pressure on the government to more release, anywhere from your spectrum of Fox News to MSNBC. They seem to have been a little bit more open-minded towards the idea there might have been a conspiracy in the JFK assassination. And it's a logical question. Why? What are they, particularly the CIA, but this is not just entirely a CIA thing, but many of the documents still withheld involve the CIA. What are they hiding? Good question. And unfortunately, the Biden administration, again, this has been passed from the Trump administration to the Biden administration, made a decision kind of to wash their hands of this, so to speak. And from this point on, leave it up to agencies. So here we are. There are some court battles, lawsuits. We're still trying to find out what those remaining documents hold in terms of answers about the JFK assassination. Okay, so now, Rachel, if you want to come up here, we've been like this will be 0 for 2, maybe 0 for 3. We're trying to play a little video here, a short clip from the last release. This was a guy, I'll just preface this here, a longtime Warren Commission lone nut apologist, sort of, Gerald Posner, appearing on Fox News on Tucker Carlson. And this is what I would describe as a kind of a change. Just click on it. The term limited hangout has often been thrown around among the JFK assassination community about, maybe admitting some things, but not all things, right? And it's interesting how you'll hear this guy kind of modify what's always been a very rigid lone nut position. So let's play it.
So the National Archives just released more than 1,000 pages of newly declassified documents relating to the Kennedy assassination. Gerald Posner is an investigative journalist who has looked through those documents. He joins us tonight. Gerald, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker. Thanks for having me.
So first, let me just ask you, there are still documents that haven't been released. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I mean, it's astonishing. 15,000 documents approximately haven't been released. I mean, these documents were sealed before you and most people who now cover the case were born. So it's been decades we're waiting for them.
So what, now you wrote a very famous book called Case Closed, which is a great book, arguing that, the Warren Commission was essentially right in its assessment as lone gunmen. But what could possibly, there's got to be some reason to keep these things classified.
Yeah, I mean, look, part of it is the bureaucracy of the intelligence services. So they won't give up on documents if they think there's something in there they want to keep secret, even if it happens to be the name of a former agent or a way that they spied on embassies from Cuba and the Soviets years ago. So they lock those up. They keep them confidential. They fight against their release. And I always thought that it would take a president like Trump, who was president in 2017 when this issue came up, to say to them, no, I'm not buying the old excuses for confidentiality, release them all. They convinced him to hold on to them. And then it came up, in October of this year with Biden, who's sort of, been there long enough in Washington that he's comfortable with those intel services. So again, most of them stay sealed. What are they going to tell us in the end? It's not a smoking gun of a conspiracy, but I do think, Tucker, that it could be hiding the evidence that the CIA in particular had information that Oswald was potentially dangerous, might act out, and they didn't do anything a month before the assassination when he had a job on the route that the president's motorcade was going past.
Okay.
Yeah, Pearl Harbor.
Now, that's, if you caught the end of it, that's kind of what I would describe as the limited hangout, a guy who'd always defended the lone nut position of the Warren Commission. Now he's making that suggestion. Now the storyline is, well, maybe the CIA dropped the ball in terms of Oswald, that they knew about Oswald as a threat, but they didn't know anything about it. That is what I would describe as a limited hangout, because I think the story is much deeper than that. But it's interesting how the positions of people in institutions might be modifying somewhat, but maybe not where they should be. Okay. So let's talk about this guy named Paul Landis, because I think a lot of you here in the audience have probably seen, it's made a lot of news. I mean, I'm just, folks not really engaged in this story would come up to me all the time and say, well, what's the story about this guy? Well, Landis is a 88-year-old Secret Service agent who came forward with a story. And it depends on your familiarity with the whole thing. And we'll talk about the single bullet theory. Came forward with a story that, he was in Dallas, that he found a bullet in the back seat of a limousine where JFK was shot. Now, if that is true, I mean, it would effectively, once and for all, destroy the single bullet theory. Because if you stick to this idea that there only could have been 3 shots if you want Oswald to be acting alone, well, the third shot has to be the one doing all the damage, the so-called magic bullet. We'll talk about in a minute. But that, that was found somewhere else. It couldn't have been in the back seat. That means there's another shot. Now, many researchers question his story, to say the least. I mean, there are a lot of folks that look at his credibility. In fact, over this weekend, Landis appeared at another conference in Washington, D.C., and a lot of people scrutinized him there. And I get it. I get a lot of folks, I could name, I'm not going to name these 2 serious researchers, but I would talk to them both, and they have an exactly opposite opinion about Landis. One thinks he's a fraud. Maybe he's lying. Maybe he wants to write a book and make some money. Another one interviewed him, said, I think he's a serious person. But whatever it is, it's ironic that the media seem to be paying attention more to this than they've ever had before. Some people that maybe don't, inside the media that don't, have not scrutinized stories enough. So maybe this is the end of the single bullet theory, So whether it's a matter of frustration on researchers who, serious people who scrutinize things, and there's things about Landis, and he may have changed his story, where the bullet was located, things like that. But on the other side of it, maybe we should just try to capitalize on the moment. If people are paying attention, then we have an opportunity to maybe explain this story better while that attention is there. So let's talk about it. And again, this is a big review for a lot of people, right? But yet maybe some don't. But the point of the matter is the single bullet theory is a linchpin of any Oswald alone scenario. And the thing is, there's plenty of evidence long before Paul Landis ever came forward that shows that it is ridiculous and impossible. The single bullet theory was originally concocted by a junior counsel on the Warren Commission, Arlen Specter. And it was never based on any facts. In fact, it was a compromise of some sorts. The Warren Commission was in an impossible position. They thought they had a nice scenario of 3 clean shots. Then all of a sudden, you got a man standing at the base of the triple underpass on Houston, on Elm Street, James Tay, who was hit by a bullet fragment or a piece of cement. So now all of a sudden, the Warren Commission's got another shot. And that's why Specter was told, go in and watch the Zapruder film. Try to figure out a way to connect all these wounds with JFK and John Connally, who was in the front seat, 7 wounds, 2 dense bones, and come out in the perfect condition that it was. I don't think any individual member of the Warren Commission really believed this. It was just like a compromise because their agenda was not to find out what happened in Dallas. Their agenda was to convince the public, satisfy the public. That statement's been made many times from people that Oswald acted alone. Okay. And so I showed some video in Dallas. I felt like we just couldn't pull that off tonight with a short period of time, but I would refer everyone in the Zoom audience and here tonight, if you can, it's a hard find, but the 1964 video done by one of the first conspiracy or critics of the Warren Commission, Mark Lane, did a video of witnesses that a few months after the assassination. And if you think something's more credible in terms of witnesses, you want to get to them earlier than later, right? Well, one of those witnesses who was standing on the triple overpass, at the base of the street in perfect position, named S.M. Holland, was interviewed by Lane. And it's always set with me, this statement he made about, he most definitely saw shots from the front. And he said twice on that video, there's no doubt in my mind. There's no doubt in my mind for someone who was there that there were shots from the front. Okay. And on that same video, Governor John Connally, who I'm going to be talking about in other contexts later, Of course, John Connally was the man who was also hit by in the car with JFK. And he survived his wounds, but he had multiple wounds. But when the story, the whole story about the magic bullet, where the shot that went through JFK's throat also had to cause all the wounds in John Connally and come out in perfect condition. But Connally, in a press conference, if anybody was paying attention in 1964, pretty much destroyed it as well. He said, look, I was not hit by that same bullet. In fact, I quote in there, I had time to turn around. Then I was hit. John Connally's saying, I wasn't hit by the same bullet. If you watch the slides from the Zapruder film, it'll tell you the same thing. He is not reacting when JFK is grabbing his throat. Again, but this is a story that we've been sold for 60 years, and we're told it's our history, and yet it's impossible. Okay, and again, this is stuff, much of this is review. It's, okay, there's the CE 399 found in Parkland Hospital. Again, there are questions about now. I mean, the whole thing will land us where the bullet was and all that. There's confusion about this, but there's no doubt this bullet in almost perfect condition, yet creating all these wounds without being deformed at all. And so it is another a big part of this impossibility. Dr. Joseph Dulce, who was the U.S. Army's most senior expert in terms of wound ballistics, basically said the same thing. One bullet striking the president's neck, the government's chest and wrist should be badly deformed, as our experiments at the Edwards Arsenal proved. The Army went and tested it, and it didn't fly. And yet nobody was paying attention, or the right people weren't paying attention. Okay. And then there's this, a forensic pathologist named Dr. Milton Helper analyzed the same evidence. That bullet, the CE 399, its original weight was 160 to 161 grams. When it was recovered, 158.6. That practically, there was nothing missing at all from that bullet, virtually nothing. Or maybe it was shot out of a gun once. That's what I believe. And this pathologist says, I cannot believe either that this bullet is going to emerge miraculously, there it is, miraculously unscathed, without any deformity, and with its lands and grooves intact. Okay? And again, you can't have one man alone unless you subscribe to this theory that seems so impossible. We had a man named Dennis David, who was at Bethesda Hospital, where he was a Navy corpsman who was at Bethesda Hospital the night where JFK's body was taken for the autopsy. That is crazy controversial in itself. But David came to our campus several times. A great guy, great human being. He's no longer with us, but I can recall him saying that night, because he had a security clearance, an FBI agent came up, pulled a flask of bullets fragments out, and poured it in front of him. So he had to sign a receipt that this FBI agent had it. And he said there was enough fragments there for somewhere between 1.5, 2 bullets. Well, there's 2 more bullets on, you have to stay inside that 3 bullet margin to keep this thing not complicated. And any evidence, and there was other things as well that just put it over that. And if there was more than 3 shots being fired, and many of us believe Oswald wasn't shooting at all, but if you stick to the idea that one man's shooting from the 6th floor of the school book depository, and there's only evidence of 3 shots, and you have more than 3 evidence of that, then somebody else was shooting, and we have a conspiracy. The nurse who took care of John Connally, who survived, when interviewed by the House Select Committee, said when they asked her point blank how many individual foreign objects were taken from Governor Connally's body, she said 4 or 5. Again, that's impossible if there's only a couple grams missing from that bullet, and they find 4 or 5 objects in Connally's wrist. Okay. And one more thing. And then I think this is where I had a conversation with him. I would recommend you go on the website for this guy and look at Frederick Whitehurst, who's a FBI, could be described as a famous whistleblower about what was going on in the FBI in the 1990s. And he called me up just out of the blue. I guess he'd heard of me. And we had about a 45-minute conversation. And this story's been out here for a while, but he eventually left the FBI because he said the FBI was basically doctoring evidence. And he worked in the forensic lab and he had proof of that. And so, you know, he sued the FBI and won for back pay for the rest of his life and $1 million. So he was on the right side of things. And he told me that in the 1990s, that a bullet was received by the FBI from Dealey Plaza where the shots were fired. It was found in the bushes by whatever, personnel of some sort. And they did an analysis on it. His expertise was paint analysis. On that bullet was a fleck of paint. And they determined that the presidential limo had a special type of paint specific to the presidential limo that they used. That paint was the same paint found on that bullet. And that bullet, well, it disappeared, but he saw it. Others saw it. I mean, and again, another bullet, another, you know, this thing about staying in with that 3-shot framework. Okay. So, you know, I think that kind of is, and other researchers could go through a myriad of things that I didn't about that make the single bullet theory ridiculous and impossible. But the point is, disproving the lone nut scenario, I think, is pretty easy. Determining the who and why. If it wasn't Oswald, then who and what? And I think that's we've gone through that idea for a long time. And I know it's difficult because the fact is, if there was really no legitimate investigation of what happened to JFK, then I would argue the Warren Commission certainly wasn't. Without a legitimate, investigation, we're left to speculate what happened in Dallas, and that to independent researchers or historians or whoever, and they look in different directions, and there's evidence in different directions. But I think we are at a point where there's enough evidence, and I'll try to make those points, that what happened in Dallas was a collaboration of powerful forces inside and outside the United States government that aligned together to eliminate Kennedy. And there are a lot of reasons for that. There's certainly enough evidence, in my opinion, to make that a historical reality. I do think it's a mistake, and I'll keep going on this later, but I do think it's a mistake, and some do, that want to attach blame to what happened in Dallas to a single entity, like the CIA. They're certainly up there on the list, or the mob, or Cuban exiles. I think that's a mistake. I think that this thing is, we have to look at the JFK assassination, and I know that that's scary for some, in a broader lens. Okay? And I think we have to look for this interconnectivity, converging links, connect the dots. And the newly classified documents, I think, that have released in the last 6 years that we have looked at, add to that narrative. And, I want to talk about at least some of them before. And I know people have seen my talks before. Some of these are reviews, some add-ons, some kind of add to the story. But these are some of the things I've seen from the documents that we've looked at here at Albany Central College from the National Archives that have been released. Okay? And so let's start with the CIA, because that's where a lot of folks want to look first. And I'm going to talk about some people, and that, these folks might or may or not be familiar to you. And I don't think these are the only people you can look at inside the Central Intelligence Agency, but there's certainly information in the classified documents that I would say reinforce the narrative about these people as being highly suspicious. William Harvey is definitely a good place to start, and we'll get to him in a moment. But there's also information in the documents to add suspicions to other top CIA agents: David Morales, E. Howard Hunt, famous for obviously the Watergate scandal, and then also David Atlee Phillips. And I'll elaborate on some of these guys for time allows here. Okay. All right. So before we get to that, though, here's a document that I just thought was interesting. I just came across from the National Archives. It's an explanation of the 201 system. Okay. folks familiar with the JFK case who look at classified documents are aware of the fact the CIA had 201 files on people. And that's an indication of operational interest. If they opened a file on you, they may or may not be connected with you, but they're certainly interested. But what I found in this document is the CIA actually does a differentiation process here. They say, well, the difference between simply attaching a 201 number to an individual means that somebody we might be interested in, but if we have a dossier, meaning a big file, an official containing file, opening forms, all biography reporting, and reference to the individual, it says these are normally subjects of extensive reporting and investigation, prospective agents and sources, members of groups and organizations of target interests, subjects who are on volume of correspondence has accumulated. They had a big file on Lee Harvey Oswald. And yet, for all these years, they've always maintained we had no connection, no operational interest. But the very fact that they had a large dossier, if you want to call it that, on Oswald, and then they define what that means, well, you can judge for yourself. Okay? So I want to tell you, and these are things that they're, again, jump around a little bit, some documents I found that are of interest. Most of you are familiar with the movie JFK. It tells the story of Jim Garrison's attempt to uncover a plot against JFK in New Orleans in the 1960s. And basically the point I'm trying to make from the declassified document is the fact the CIA's reach by the mid-1960s to attempt to squelch this story, okay? So much so that they were, Garrison trying to promote his case even went abroad, trying to get folks to show it. He was invited to go to the Netherlands to talk about his case in 1968. And apparently the CIA was very interested, even what Jim Garrison was saying in Europe. Okay, it says this is a description of Garrison from the CIA. He escalated his attack on the CIA with a persuasive performance. So I guess the CIA was impressed with Jim Garrison. Okay, and I won't go through all of this thing, but the bottom there says consideration is being given to forwarding to the station at The Hague in Netherlands overt derogatory information about Garrison from the U.S. press to release CIA assets there. So it's proof the CIA was actively trying to destroy Jim Garrison in his attempt to find out the truth about what happened in Dallas. And they were willing to go across the Atlantic to do it. Okay. As early as 1964, the CIA was engaged in attempts to silence critics, even before the Warren Commission came out. And anybody that was objected to the idea that was Oswald alone. Then Deputy Director Richard Helms sent a classified document to then private citizen Allen Dulles. Now, if you know anything about Allen Dulles, he was the most powerful man in the CIA for many years. He was fired by JFK after the Bay of Pigs debacle. And yet he's still a power behind the scenes because Helms is sending Dulles a classified document. Why are you sending a classified document to a private citizen? And about what? Well, the first book of 1,000 books about this conspiracy was written by, I believe from England, Thomas Buchanan, who killed Kennedy. So Helms, right off the bat, is telling Dulles, you better get on this. It's obvious that Dulles is a centerpiece of the cover-up. They're sending him information. And of course, who's really running the Warren Commission when it starts up? Who's really controlling the evidence? Allen Dulles. Okay. This is an interesting guy I found, not because sometimes it's, the point I'm just trying to make here, and again, I know some of you know more, some of you know less. This might not mean anything to some of you, but in some cases, the documents, it's not what they say, it's what's missing. Because I found a document that had some real power players from the CIA included in its discussion. But as you know, some of these documents are redacted where the names are removed. Okay. And for some reason, they were willing on this document to discuss William Harvey, James Anglin, Ray Rocca, all heavy hitters in the CIA. But one name was redacted, and I wondered who that was. And then in a rolling release, the next time it came out, this guy's name popped up, Leo Sherney. Why was it important to keep his name out of it? I talked to a researcher named Bill Simpson. He says, yeah, Sherney's a guy. He was a player. He described kind of euphemistically as a public servant. He served as Gerald Ford on his Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. So he had power, he had status, he was in the CIA, and yet for some reason, somebody in the JFK Act decided his name should be left out. And again, this is things that leads to be followed up, I guess. Okay. So let's talk about Harvey. And I know some of the audience have heard a lot about Harvey before. I've talked about him. Described him, some have described him as a real life James Bond. He certainly had the profile. In fact, I would say his file, because I've looked extensively at his personnel file, reveals a man with a perfect profile of someone capable of participating and carrying out an assassination plot. In fact, that's what he was in charge of. Ultimately became the charge of the CIA's, if you want to call it, executive action program, assassination program in the early 1960s. That was William Harvey. He's described in his personnel files being willing to be involved in highly sensitive and extremely political operations. Again, maybe the euphemism there, I think. He comes across as a dangerous, secretive individual willing to go rogue. In fact, his file says he moved in positions stronger than his superior officers. He's out in front of people in the CIA. He was tenacious, aggressive. He had at his disposal a coterie of officers loyal to him, known as Harvey men. And let's point out, Harvey hated JFK. And his brother. There's no point. No. In fact, in a video of his wife after his death, his wife said point blank that Harvey said the Kennedys were scum. Okay. And there's more on him. One suspicious character, codenamed Q.J. Wynn. There's a lot of code names in the files and stuff. I don't want to muddy the waters too much here, but Q.J. Wynn is certainly a character that would have been involved in assassination. He was involved in assassination abroad, and his potential involvement with the assassination of the African leader Lumumba in the early 1960s. And the House Select Committee brought William Harvey in and interviewed him when they were taking a look at the assassination in the 1970s, and asked him what about your involvement with this guy, Q.J. Wynn? Well, I didn't have any, Harvey basically didn't really say anything. I don't think he was here. In fact, I think he might have been John Roselli. He made some comment like that was crazy. I'll talk about Roselli in a minute. But that claim seemed dubious because there were bills and receipts of plane tickets that Harvey got for Q.J. Wynn from Miami to Chicago. When finally pressed harder by the House Select Committee, Harvey even went so far as to maybe explain or admit, I don't know what he was doing. Whether he blurted this out or not. He said, you know what, if you really want to talk about assassinating someone, this is a quote from Harvey. You simply need to appoint a single senior officer to do everything to run the operation, to kill the person, to bury the body and tell no one. I just would have liked to have been there on that interview. It's hard to say if Harvey was being deceptive in his statement, or was he really describing somebody in the agency or even himself? And here's an example of a document that I found where, even the CIA thought this guy was rogue. I mean, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we were threatened by World War III, and it looked like America might invade. Obviously, JFK decided not to. But Harvey didn't wait. He sent his people into Cuba to start, with military actions inside Cuba with his Cuban exile loyalties. And he could have started World War III. Ed Lansdale, some people think might have been involved in the JFK assassination himself, at the bottom of this document said that, as discussing Harvey, said, Harvey earned another black mark as not being fully under control. I think this is where you need to look. The people who are willing to be radical, people who are being willing to be over the top on their actions. Okay.
There's Dave Morales. Morales had a stellar reputation inside the CIA. In fact, one document described him as a one-man gang. Maybe he's the guy Harvey was talking about. Okay. His work was of the highest order. He worked at the JM Wave station with all the things going on with the attempts to get Castro in Cuba. He's described as being involved in counterintelligence, sabotage, political action, propaganda, and a great number of miscellaneous activities that defy classification. Pay attention when they don't tell you the whole thing, okay? Even Morales's personnel file in the classified documents, I came across at one page. It said, well, this area of this personnel file has been sanitized. They actually used the word sanitized. In other words, they didn't want anybody to see it. Okay. So let's get back to Harvey, because I think there's a key link with Harvey in terms of the mob. And we look at one John Roselli, who's a key figure in some ways in all this. And I invite everybody in the audience and people on Zoom, if you do look at the documents in the National Archives, a fascinating document is the CIA file that explains their relationship with the mobster Johnny Roselli. In fact, they even meant that they were going to get engaged in gangster type actions with the mob. Of course, initially that was to get Castro. I mean, the mob had an interest in getting their casinos back in Cuba. The CIA had an interest in getting rid of the communists in Cuba. So there was strange bedfellows, however you want to describe it. The CIA and the mob had a relationship, which I think is obviously, and we all know this, a real indictment of the CIA. But that document describes in detail Roselli's relationship to the CIA until it gets to the point chronologically in May of '62, where it says Mr. William Harvey took over Roselli's case officer and is not known by this office whether Roselli was used operationally from that point on. The CIA is admitting either one of two things. They didn't know what was going on with Harvey and Roselli, or they're not telling us. They wouldn't even be willing to put it in that classified file that they never thought would see the light of day anyway. It's also important to note that the FBI, because Roselli was a mobster, had him on surveillance. He had him wiretapped. But strangely, all the records of Roselli 2 weeks prior, 2 weeks after the assassination, they're gone. Wonder why. It's hard to understand maybe what Roselli's role might have been in Dallas. We know he was a liaison between the mob and the CIA. Some think Roselli was trying to stop the assassination. Some think he's one of the shooters. Again, that just shows you the variance of opinions about this whole story. Okay. Let's go local, shall we? Okay. Let's go to Effingham, Illinois. Because sometimes, and I know people in the Zoom probably don't know what I'm talking about, but Effingham's a town 45 minutes from Olney, Illinois. And sometimes you come across stories of interest, I have over the years, that are surprising, that fall in your lap. And I remember not long ago talking to somebody in Newton, Illinois, about a story about something that went on anecdotally up near Effingham at I think it's St. Elmo, a small town outside of Effingham, in the oil fields there. And of course, Jack Ruby, the man who shot Lee Harvey Oswald and silenced the supposed assassin. Well, I was told stories by individuals about that Jack Ruby was working on some oil wells for H.L. Hunt. And H.L. Hunt was one of the biggest oil guys in the country, a suspicious guy in Texas that we'll get to in a moment. And apparently he owned property around Effingham. What's significant about that? Well, the story was told to me that after the assassination, FBI agents showed up at this oil rig, if you want to call it this, or oil patch, and told people to keep their damn mouths shut about the fact that Jack Ruby was up there. And I said, wow, first of all, why was Ruby there? Well, for one, Ruby knew H.L. Hunt. Ruby knew everybody in Dallas. I mean, he was connected, and he was connected. He may have been in that weekend in H.L. Hunt's office, prior to assassinating Oswald. So maybe he was doing some work for Hunt up near Effingham, Illinois. And then I got a further story, which might be interesting to some of you folks locally, is the fact that I've talked to people more about that, and they said, well, Hunt owned a lot of properties up there, but also, Ruby was initially a mobster from Chicago. I was told that in fact, a lot of Chicago mobsters came down to Effingham as kind of a getaway. So it's intriguing for you local folks to think about that. Okay. All right. So let's move on. And again, I'm going to use this term interconnectivity. And I believe that term means simply that across the lines of power, you need to look at these connections, these links of people that could have reacted and done these things to involve themselves in a conspiracy. And there's certainly some evidence of CIA connections to folks in Texas. And I want to talk about that. Okay, let's start with this guy. And I think he's really important. Gordon McClendon was a true Texas insider, a media personality. He had connections to all. He knew Lyndon Johnson. He knew Jack Ruby. And he also we now know that he had a 201 file on Gordon McClendon, which means the CIA had operational interest in Gordon McClendon, a guy with a lot of connections in Texas. Ultimately, in 1975, after the assassination, McClendon and David Atlee Phillips, who's another very suspicious guy in all this, I won't have time to develop all that, formed an association of former intelligence officers that basically their mission was to squelch, again, any investigation of what happened in Dallas, I think, more than anything else. And I don't know if you saw one of the, I didn't put it up, it's been spoken of many times, one of the more significant documents that came out recently after the 2017 release was a FBI informant who said that Jack Ruby stated, it was in the media, that I'm going to go watch the fireworks that day, that he told an FBI informant prior to the assassination. Obvious that unless Ruby, it wasn't the 4th of July, Ruby was telling some, I'm going to go watch the president get shot. Well, Gordon McClendon, according to sources where he was at that day at his place of business, made some other comment. I'm going to go see the president get shot. According to researcher Seth Canner, Ruby and McClendon were so close that when Ruby was arrested after he shot Oswald, he shouted out for Gordon McClendon. So again, you look for these kind of connections. Okay. Well, what about Texas? What about Lyndon Johnson? Of course, always controversy to go there, but of course, you also have to say, no one benefited more, as we'll talk about in a minute, than Lyndon Johnson from the death of JFK. No one was in a better position to make things happen. And not only more to gain, but when you talk about Lyndon Johnson, more to lose, I think, because James Wagenvord, an assistant to Life magazine's creative editor in 1963, Life magazine was the most powerful media outlet in America in 1963. And they were involved in a major expose to, according to Wagenvord, in Johnson's political career and possibly sending him to prison. I mean, Johnson was up to his eyeballs in scandals, anywhere from Bobby Baker, his Secretary of Senate, who was his bagman, Billy Solestes, and this agricultural scandal in Texas led to the death of an agent named Henry Marshall. They're a TFX fighter scandal where they rigged it so that General Dynamics could get a contract for a fighter. It ended up being the worst thing that happened to the American military. There's just no end to Johnson's corruption prior to the assassination. And so life was on Johnson's tail hard. In fact, one of the key exposés was going to come out about the same time that JFK got shot. Guess who was feeding the information to end Johnson's career? Bobby Kennedy. The Kennedys wanted Johnson off the ticket and in jail. And I think there's no doubt about that. Of course, all that goes away. 11/22/63. Understandably so. Okay, here's a classified document I think is significant in that respect. I know you probably can't read it, but I like to just show you the official nature of it. It's a document, February of 1964. It's coming from the FBI. And basically what happened, okay, Bobby Baker, working in the United States Senate, was basically under investigation. His connections to Lyndon Johnson, is taking bribes and money in the Senate. Well, a couple months after the assassination, now Lyndon Johnson's president, basically the file on Bobby Baker was sent over to Lyndon Johnson from the Justice Department. And then the investigation went on a complete standstill because he wouldn't give it back. Okay, that's basically what we're looking at here. Okay. In essence, well, I mentioned Billy Solestes, another corrupt relationship that Johnson had. We see the same thing. Now that it's deleted, but one can only imagine the names are redacted, that it was somebody associated with Johnson. The same thing, on a mission, because Billy Solestes was in investigation in 1965. They were on a mission designed to get Estes out on bond and off the hook of all charges. When you're in power, you can make things go away, right? Let me elaborate on that. I make the comparison to what's going on with Israel right now with Netanyahu. Okay, and all the mess there. Well, Netanyahu was, like Lyndon Johnson, under all sorts of investigations of corruption and scandal in Israel. And I think if you people were following the news, you know what happened. He gets elected. He tries to change the Supreme Court in Israel so he can basically stop the investigation, right? When you're in power and you almost like an authoritarian figure, you can make things go away. Okay? It's always a concern. All right. So let's go back to John Connally. All right. Because you're saying, well, John Connally was shot in the front seat. Yeah, he was, but he was also a close ally of Lyndon Johnson. And there are a lot of important things to say about Connally that I think are disturbing. And first of all, in April of 1963, it should be noted that Lyndon Johnson announced on a radio station President Kennedy's trip to Texas before JFK approved it. It's almost like, is Kennedy being lured to Dallas? I mean, Johnson just went ahead and said, he's coming to Texas before JFK. He went along. He got, there were enough folks that convinced Kennedy he needed to go down there. But Johnson's man, Governor John Connally, was instrumental in luring Kennedy to Dallas and convincing him to come. In fact, and then there's this, which was a 1978 document, a different, not the Billy Solestes I mentioned earlier, but a Whitey Estes gave a 13-page deposition, a drifter who walked into the FBI office in 1978 and stated he worked at Jack Ruby's Carousel Club prior to the assassination. And he said at one point he saw Jack Ruby with Lee Harvey Oswald, the accused assassin that eventually Ruby shot, and John Connally shows up for some type of meeting prior to the assassination. It was John Connally who bullied JFK's advance man, Jerry Bruno, into agreeing to have a luncheon at the Trademark, thereby, which was where JFK's destination before he, when he went to Elm Street, never reached the Trademark. But he bullied Jerry Bruno, JFK's advance man, to change the destination to the Trademark, thereby ensuring he would be on a route that could be redirected to go through Dealey Plaza. That's suspicious. or more so. You said, well, what happened? Conley got shot. Well, I think maybe, I'm not sure if folks, if Conley knew the whole story. I think he was a soldier doing things and might have something to do why John Conley never had a very good relationship with Lyndon Johnson after that. Okay, we'll just put it that. So let's move on. Interconnectivity between the CIA and the military. And I think what you have to see here is where I start to go into this thing about, or things about, look for a radical nature in elements in different ages. People who are willing, who are on the extreme and willing to do radical things. And one of those operations and groups was a small counterintelligence group called AXI. The abbreviation is AXI, that we've seen a lot about, and their connections with the CIA. Let's just go into it. The AXI was a secretive counterintelligence unit inside the United States military. It's become very suspicious in this matter. There are clear indications of connections between them and the CIA. And there is a documented evidence of AXI's willingness to undertake radical, extreme actions. In fact, we'll get to that. And I looked at the AXI's military history. It's interesting. According to the Defense Department, AXI was a small special purpose military unit created in 1960 to coordinate intelligence. Fletcher Prouty, a man who we could say probably knew a lot about this whole story, described AXI as the black intelligence arm of the United States military. Okay. Here's a document of one Dorothy Matlack, who we know was an AXI. But what's important about this document is that she was also a liaison with the CIA. Again, looking for this interconnectivity. And it's clearly stated that she was a member of AXI, but this document is also approval to be basically hired on by the CIA as well. The interesting thing is, you see highlighted there, this all went down in 1958, except the official Department of Military History of this organization said it wasn't created until 1960. So these guys were around, somebody made a mistake, or these guys were around, whether they're trying to keep this whole thing a secret about who these guys were. That's the interesting thing about that document. Okay. All right. There are other people. I mean, here's another AXI guy, Sam Cale. There it is, right on the thing, connected to the CIA. In fact, Cale would say at one point, I don't know who I was working for half the time when he's working in different operations, like in Mexico City, whether I was CIA or military. Okay. And I think what's important, I mentioned Matlack. I know I got a lot of texts there. I apologize. These big texts blow up at you. I probably should have had less here. But it's important to note, Matlack and a CIA officer met with one George de Mohrenschildt in 1963, prior to the assassination. Many people see George de Mohrenschildt as the man who handled Lee Harvey Oswald. So here's a contact between AXI and a man in a connecting link with Oswald himself. Okay, now I no time not to develop that as much as I should, but let's keep going here. So when we talk about the military a little bit, and one of the most important things about the United States military in 1962, I think, is at some of the highest levels of the Joint Chiefs of, again, extreme desire for extreme actions. One of the most important documents ever came out that was declassified years ago was called Operation Northwoods, and many people are familiar with it. Basically, the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1962 were going to a series of recommendations to JFK and the administration to try to find a way to either invade or eliminate Castro, public enemy number one. And they were willing to conduct all sorts of false flag, covert operations to create a pretext for invading Cuba. I mean, some of them were just downright insane. Blow up an airliner, blame it on Castro. If John Glenn's, the first man to go into space, if his capsule happens to blow up on the pad, okay, we'll just say it, Castro did it, and then we can invade Cuba. Start a false Cuban terror campaign in Florida blame it on Castro. All these things that they were presenting to JFK. And the Secretary of Defense McNamara, Lyman Lemnitzer, was one of them. And the Kennedy administration just basically, this is crazy. You guys you're way out there. They humiliated the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in effect, and said, we're not going to do this stuff. But again, I'm giving you demonstrations of an extreme nature of folks that were particularly anti-communist, to the point of even wanting World War III. Let's settle this right now. Curtis LeMay, maybe one of the biggest Kennedy haters in the Joint Chiefs. I think some of those guys, let's take Russia on. We can win a nuclear war, which in today's ideas seems insane, but that's what the Kennedys were faced with. Okay. All right. To show you, I found a document on Axie. And again, a lot of this stuff is in the weeds, but I think this is important. I talked about these folks as being, you look for folks radical in nature. I think this is probably a demonstration of that. A document coming from Axie saying, what can we do about Castro? Well, on the second line there, it says, let's just assassinate him. Okay. I haven't seen many documents where anybody, even the CIA, openly says, let's just go kill somebody. Apparently, these guys were ready to kill somebody or kidnap him. And by the way, at the bottom, they said, we might want to use biological warfare against Cuba too. Oh, okay. There's another extreme thing to do. All right. So again, looking for a radical element inside the United States government. Okay. And we can look outside that too. I think there's a lot of evidence that suggests circulating, Dallas, Texas was a hotbed of some of the most extreme ideas in the country. And some of you know more about this than others. You know about the KKK. Maybe you don't know about John Birch, but man, they were out there too. And I'm not attacking people, they're Shriners, but there was also a Southern Freemason group that really had extreme views about a lot of things. They were racist. They were extremely anti-communist. They hated Kennedy. I mean, JFK said when he was going into Dallas, we're going into nut country. And that's a good summation in many respects. One man, Joseph Milter, was caught on tape by a FBI informant named Willie Somerset. And Milter, prior to the assassination, described in detail what was going to happen in Dallas and even mentioned, I'm going to be there. Somerset would later describe Milter, who was really a member of all these racist KK, John Birch's Citizens Council groups, or it's just a number of different organizations, as maybe the most dangerous man in America. He had foreknowledge of the assassination. Okay. And this one's a crazy story. People call me the story of Mark Harris is very interesting. The guy called me up a while back and he assured me, I'm not crazy. Okay. And after talking to him an hour, all right, I don't think you're crazy either. In fact, he's an airplane pilot. I mean, he's a legitimate job as a pilot. But at one point, his ex-wife, they became something mentally insane or something. They split. And he adopted his wife's son to another person named Mickey Nobles. He describes this Mickey Nobles as an anti-government activist with ties to the CIA. He was also involved with money laundering, racketeering, organized crime in Florida, and also a member of the radical Southern Freemasons. And he got engaged in law actions with this Nobles guy because he was trying to get possession of this adopted son in court. And he ran into all sorts of interference and intimidation. And his son, this adopted son who was autistic, said, I was kept in this, what I can only describe as a CIA house of terror in Florida, where they did all sorts of things, pedophilia, and this kid, he had to get his kid out of that. And, he went through all this process and he said, some of these people, believed all these things going back, thousands of years. I don't have time to get into all this, but he said, I don't believe, the Freemasonry and things like that. He said, I don't believe in all that stuff, but these people did. And, the important thing he told me about the story is in this CIA safe house, he described it, that they had a hero's gun on the wall. His son told him that. And he said, they told him that was a gun used in Dealey Plaza. Interesting. Okay. Well, for people who really want to look at this in more depth, I always say the best place to start. I've given you all these things, and I'm going to give you a little more here. But if you really want to start somewhere to look at what happened in Dallas 60 years down the road, a good place to start is the Texas School Book Depository. That's where Lee Harvey Oswald was supposed to taken the 3 shots to kill Kennedy. And if Oswald was definitely the patsy, and I believe he was, who put him there? Where does that start? And the answer, the man who owned the Texas School Book Depository was D.H. Byrd, who hired Oswald. And D.H. Byrd has a myriad of connections, all different directions of people suspicious in all this. It's just a long list. He was a business crony of LBJ. He had ties to big oil and the people who had interests, of maybe financing the assassination. The military industrial complex in Texas. He was friends with Curtis LeMay, who I said that was the biggest Kennedy hater in the Joint Chiefs. A story was circulated that he was big game hunting in Africa at the time of the assassination with one Otto Skorzeny, a top Nazi who was brought to the United States as a CIA operative. It was like a who's list of suspects in the JFK murder. So in effect, what we're seeing, D.H. Byrd, you have 2 degrees of separation from the man accused of the assassination, D.H. Byrd linking to all these other people who are so suspicious. Okay. So I think that maybe tells us a little bit about what the story's about. I don't know, but it certainly makes it suspicious. I know, again, many of you probably seen the movie, people who had contempt for Kennedy, as I said, but the movie Oliver Stone's JFK, right? Telling a story about the New Orleans DA, Jim Garrison, and the assassination. At one point in the movie, Garrison, who probably didn't have as much information as we do today about what happened in Dallas, but he interjected that it was a coup d'etat with Lyndon Johnson waiting in the wings. And so, maybe was Stone's film really that far from the truth? I wonder. Okay. So I think, that we need to come to a historical truth about the JFK murder 60 years later. And I know this in some ways might be vague, but a collaboration of the most powerful people in the country that aligned against Kennedy. Kennedy had I said in my class today, in political assassination class today, that Kennedy, yes, he had a 60% approval rating at the time of his assassination, which is incredible. I know Joe would like that right now, right? I'm not going to go into that, okay? But, well, you can say the same thing about Trump. He never had those kind of numbers either. Kennedy was a popular figure. And yet, behind the scenes, there were powerful people who saw Kennedy as a threat, in some cases, a threat to their existence, their survival, their power, and a desire to change things. Gordon Ferry, who I've talked to, a man who described as being in the middle of the military industrial complex, who I interviewed in detail, told me that his initial reaction when JFK was shot was, which group? Okay, interesting. First thing that came to mind, because Kennedy had plenty of enemies. Okay, so I think we want to. I had another thing, but I'm going to probably cut it a little bit short here. I think I'd just like to go through some things that I think are important in regards to, the context of what happened in Dallas, and you can give it a little more about what it all means 60 years later. Okay. Because, you know, I don't know if I've given you more information or maybe I've piqued your interest. I don't know. In a lot of situations, I think when an anniversary comes up, you know, they always mark the anniversaries of everything, right? You know, the anniversary of 9/11, you know, anniversary of Pearl Harbor. And that's always been the case with the assassination of JFK. Tomorrow night will be that 60th, but before that, there was the 50th. Before that, there was the 40th. And I can recall in those situations that each time that folks wondered, well, is this it? Is this the end of the story? I mean, we've reached this mark. Is it time to move on about this story? It has, after all, been 60 years. And I say my answer to that is a definite no. I think not as long as justice has been left undone. And I believe justice has been left undone in this case. But at the end of but on the other side of it, I don't think, you know, that we can say that there's no end game either. In some cases, we have situations where, you know, this is a perpetuation. This is not about writing another book or giving another speech, which I've done over the years and other people have. You know, that's not the objective for people who are passionate about this story. I think. I hope so. I hope not anyway. I've always believed that the JFK assassination badly damaged our democracy. Now, there are those, especially those in the JFK assassination community, that take it farther than that, and they think it ended democracy. And that's a legitimate position to take. If there was, in fact, a coup d'etat and the elimination of a president, in some ways, could you argue that? I understand that, but maybe I take a more optimistic viewpoint about where we're at in 2023. In the fact that, you know, there's still a chance for the American people to affect change on a government that's supposed to represent them. And there are examples of that. I mean, for instance, Vietnam. I mean, it became obvious that it was a tragic war that began under false circumstances. The Gulf of Tonkin, some of you are aware of that, that drug on and on. It was the American people who put enough pressure on its leaders to bring it into that war, and in fact, also into the presidency of Lyndon Johnson over it. It's not like Americans still can't have their government react to their positions. It's still possible. It's still possible to get a correction in history, because to me, this is the most important thing here, is that, you know, that we get our history correct. In a democracy, democracy is hard. It requires justice and truth. It's much easier to be an authoritarian, and you see it all over the world right now, where leaders take over and tell you what the truth is. In a democracy, we need the truth. We need justice. That's why it's so important that we get to that. There are examples where that has happened. I oftentimes talk about Executive Order 9066, was probably the most heinous thing that FDR did in World War II or in his political career, when he made a decision under a lot of public pressure to put Japanese Americans, remove them from the West Coast of the United States, put them in detention camps for denying their rights as American citizens, and put them in detention camps. It was wrong. It was an atrocity. And as the years went by, I think people recognized that fact. And we righted a wrong. In 1988, the Civil Liberties was passed, signed by Ronald Reagan, and officially apologized to the Japanese Americans, giving them reparations. Okay? It's not that this can't happen. This can't be effective. That our history can be corrected. That we can apologize for our mistakes. Okay? And again, I keep coming back to the term, one of my favorite words, justice. And I have some quotes here that, and I know the people that have been in my classroom probably heard them before. From the book of Amos, let justice well up like a mighty stream. H.L. Mencken said, injustice is relatively easy to bear. What stings is justice. And then the famous quote from the letter from Birmingham jail by MLK, which should be required reading or memorization by all students, I think, where King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Okay. So that's what I think we continue to try to see 60 years after the fact. You know, when I grew up, I was naive, like a lot of, as a young American. I believe we were the good guys. Let's just put it down to that simple, that America, we're supposed to be the good guys, right? That America leads the world as the leading democracy in the world, that we would ultimately do the right thing despite our flaws. And then, I pick up later on a book on the first book I read on the JFK assassination. And I'm not saying it was the best book ever written. I'm not even going to really mention it, but it laid out a story that like hit me over the head like a hammer. Like maybe things aren't all what they appear to be. Maybe there's something that we're not always on the right side of this. That if somebody can assassinate the president of JFK and walk away clean and get away with it, we're all under threat if they can get to the president of the United States. I think a lot of people came to that kind of epiphany at some point that has looked at this story. And in that respect, I think we still have to keep pressing for the truth. For our democracy, our republic, it's essential. Benjamin Franklin made the famous statement about, when asked after the Constitution was written, what form of government shall we have? He said, a republic, if we can keep it. But the last part of Franklin's statement is always left out. He also said, it's our responsibility to do it. Okay. And then I also asked the question I oftentimes ask in class. What does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to be an American? Are we going to keep these things that started with the Declaration of Independence about equality, freedom, rule by the people, the Jeffersonian Creed? Despite our contradictions, America is still an idea, a great idea. But it's also, again, when there are things that are an open wound on the American consciousness like this is, they have to be corrected somehow. It may not be in our lifetimes. Maybe I know we could talk about the media like we started with tonight, how maybe they ignore this story, our institutions. I think there's plenty of evidence of something sinister in Dallas, yet without institutional validation from our media, our government, our academic world, what's written in the history books. And you can still pick up my history book and it still says Oswald did it. Okay. Do we get that corrected? I think it's really important. I really do so. So whether that happens or not, I always also say that truth at the highest level resides in our own minds. We can all be fact finders. We can all be truth seekers about what happens. We can all critically think. And when things like this, when things are presented to us that don't add up, we have to see that. We have to see it. And, I challenge my students to do that. And I challenge all of you to do that. And I leave you with this, that if you're not already, or you should be, keep being truth seekers. Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, Dave, I'm going to talk to my Zoom guy here, and I thought I'd go ahead and open up the audience if they have any questions tonight. And I know you might. Now, what's going to happen on Zoom is after I'm done, we've got 3 other great researchers, Dave Knight, Casey Quinlan, and Brian Edwards from Project JFK. They're going to give presentations on Zoom too. And so I want to let them get on and do their thing on Zoom as well. But does anybody have any questions? Anything question wise? Don't be afraid. Anything?
Hey, Dave,
Yeah, hang on, yeah, first, go ahead, Casey.
I was just going to say, you know me as well. You and I collaborate quite a bit. I couldn't agree with you more on the direction that you're taking your students. And I think that's a positive thing that we need to have in the up and coming years, so that eventually we will turn all this stuff over to your students. And I also think that we're getting closer and closer to the truth, even though we heavily rely on the United States government to release documents. And if they didn't release those documents, I think researchers like ourselves would at least present it to a group of students in a fashion that is more democratic than it is autocratic. So I praise you for what you are doing and what you are continuing to do.
Thanks, Casey. And Casey's an educator as well. I'll get your question in a minute, Seven, but somebody asked me, so do I think, and because I'm glad that brought this up because I want to elaborate on something. Somebody asked on Zoom, do I think that LBJ had a hand in the assassination? And I'll just I'll just, rather than answer it, because I think it's kind of self-evident where my position is maybe that Johnson had some role, some complicity, but I'll pose that with a question. Why would Lyndon Johnson engage in a massive, because a lot of folks, even inside are split in the community about, some folks think that Lyndon Johnson was only involved in the cover-up, that he wasn't involved in the actual participation of the assassination, even though it happened in Texas, even though it happened right, where Johnson had so much power, and a number of reasons. My answer to that would be, why would Johnson involve himself, risk his presidency in a massive cover-up if he didn't have a stake in the game? That's my answer. And I don't know if that answered that guy's question, but I'll say that again. Why would Johnson engage in the cover-up of the century, and risk his presidency in doing so if he didn't have a stake in the game? Okay, Seven, you have a question, and I'll repeat it for the audience. Go ahead. Speak loudly, man.
People in the CIA that are very capable, dangerous people who go like, or hypothetically go rogue. Like that. But just hypothetically assassination someone.
Well, first of all, I think we need to be careful here, because Seven is asking a question about how many people, one of my students, how many people might in the CIA might be willing to engage in assassination. I think we have to be careful here. I think the CIA of 1963 and the CIA of 2023 are two entirely different things. In the late 1970s, the Congress became aware of the assassination plots that the CIA engaged in against other people besides JFK. So they were obviously in that business. I'm not sure that, I don't know, people might disagree. I'm not sure that the CIA is involved in running around and killing people in 2023. But in 1963, they had operatives. They had something Seven called the Executive Action Program, where people were a super secret program involved that very subject matter, the elimination of leaders that were considered to be enemies of the United States. And yeah, it's a sign of a radical nature. I don't think everybody in the CIA were cold-blooded killers, though. Okay, I mean, you had people in different elements. I came across in one of my talks about 10 years ago with a guy, after speaking about the JFK assassination, who came up to me afterwards. He was obviously a retired CIA agent, and he showed me a card, Department of Defense cards, that said he was involved in Operation Phoenix. If you know anything about Phoenix in Vietnam, was probably one of the worst things the CIA was engaged in there, which was a program of assassination of suspected Viet Cong village heads in Vietnam. So yeah, there's plenty of evidence of it. I can't say that they're all in that, they were all in that business though. Anybody else? Questions? Might have a question. Yeah, go ahead. Could you really speak loudly, please? Well, I wouldn't say he was in Cuba itself, but yeah, I mean, Oswald, all right, let's talk about Lee Harvey Oswald and what I think was his real role. That's a great question. You know, I think the best answer of who Lee Harvey Oswald was, he was a low-level intelligence operative who was moved around like a pawn on a chessboard, and particularly infiltrating different operations. You know, he tried to infiltrate pro-communist groups in New Orleans. And I think by 1963, I feel like his job, he thought it was his job to infiltrate folks in the Cuban exile community that ultimately might be engaged in the assassination. I think Oswald felt his job, and maybe it was his job directed to infiltrate the plot against JFK. And yet when he becomes a part of that, I think he becomes the patsy. I think he ultimately maybe realized that, but maybe not the full detail. I think that's the story of Oswald. Yes, he was infiltrating groups like that. And I think that was part of his MO as an intelligence operative. Okay. Any other questions? Got a little time here. Go ahead. Okay. The question was about what relation of Oswald's relation with Judith Baker in New Orleans. And the Judith Baker story is a fascinating story. You know, it's basically a story that you know, obviously folks, you know, Baker is supposed to be, or has told folks that she was Oswald's mistress, and she gives a story, a detailed account of her relationship with Oswald in the summer of '63, leading up to the assassination. And, you know, I would invite you to, I mean, it's a complicated story. I would invite you to, you know, if what she says is true, it really validates a lot of these things that I'm saying about. But I would invite you to, you know, her book called Me and Lee, read it for yourself and decide for yourself about that story. It's an intriguing tale. Okay. Anybody else? Questions? Yes. Yeah. And I think, you know, probably time doesn't allow so a lot of the things, you know, I said the question about this Miami and Chicago mobs. Well, there's certainly some things there. I mean, in terms of top mobsters, the top mobster in Miami was Santos Trafficante. Trafficante had a huge interest in the casinos that he lost in Cuba, just like, you know, that common interest with the CIA in terms of taking Cuba back from Castro. And Trafficante was connected to some other powerful people, not outside the mob, people in Texas. Well, I think maybe, I'm sorry, I think the guy that really I'm thinking was Carlos Marcello in New Orleans, who was connected to maybe one of the most powerful guys in Texas, Clint Murkison, who had another person who had everything to gain and everything and a lot to lose with the assassination of JFK in Texas. That in some cases, these powerful people were interconnected and are suspicious. Sam Giancana out of Chicago. Giancana was supposed to another mobster was supposed to speak to Congress in the 1970s when they were investigating this story. And of course, Giancana ended up dead. So, you know, Bobby Kennedy did two things within 24 hours of his brother's assassination. He contacted the CIA, the head of the CIA that day and said, "Did you guys do it?" He did. And the next call was one of the top mob lawyers in the country. Do you guys have anything to do with it? I think Bobby Kennedy understood where to look. And, you know, again, more to develop there, but I hope I gave you some sense of that. Okay, any other questions? Well, do you have any questions on your end? Dave, I know we probably want to get an opportunity to get you guys going. So, and we're reaching the end here. So I would just like to thank everybody on Zoom that joined us tonight. I hope it was interesting and informative. Everybody here in person, we had a really good crowd here. As promised, students, I hope you signed your extra credits for your extra credit. You know, I have to entice these students to come, you know. And we also have pizza out in the lobby for the students. You know, there's a lot out there, I think. Rachel, is it all out there? So even if you're not a student and you hang around a little bit and wait for them to go first, there might be some pizza for you. But I really appreciate all of you that came tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David Denton.
That's it.
Appreciate that. You did an awesome job.
Dave, thanks.
I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Dave for putting this event on. This was his idea, and I'm just helping facilitate it. But we're gonna let Dave get out there so he can get some pizza with the students, and we're gonna turn it over now to Casey Quinlan. Think of this as the evening of the 60th anniversary of JFK being assassinated, and why we're here is in remembrance of a great man and a great leader, and what took place 60 years ago tonight. JFK was flying into Fort Worth before his trip to Dallas, Texas, to go to the Trade Mart to give a speech. Well, 60 years ago tonight would be the last night that he would be able to spend time with, you know, before he saw his last sunrise, so to speak. And we're here to commemorate the research community, the JFK assassination, and the man himself. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Casey. I know he wants to talk about some great finds. And with that, go ahead and unmute your mic, Casey, and you've got the floor.
Am I on, David?
Yep, I've got you loud and clear. Go ahead, Casey.
All right, I'm gonna make sure I get my slide program up here. Flipping it over here. Let me see if I can get it.
All right.
All right, can you see this now?
No, make sure you click share screen. You're almost there. Bear with us here. Casey's a little technically challenged, but we'll get him up here.
I'm little and I am technically challenged. Stop video, mute participant, share screen. I think I got it. Are we close?
Make sure you click the window that your PowerPoint is open in, and then click share.
I got share screen.
Yep. And then a window pops up and your PowerPoint should be in there.
All right, hold on.
All right, there we go.
You got it on?
Yep, just go ahead and click on your slide of whatever you want to show, and then make that full screen. Because right now I've just got your thumbnails.
I got you. Well, good Lord. Come on, baby. Let's do this. Yeah, I still see the thumbnails. I'm trying to figure out where to put this at.
Click on the top, you'll see slideshow, and if that's what you want to start with on number 4, then just click from current slide.
Well, I'm clicking from the beginning, but I'm still in the this format. Okay. Well, I just had it up too. Okay, hold on. Well, you're still seeing my thumbnails, aren't you?
Yeah, give me I just requested remote connection. Go ahead and click yes. Is that where you want to start at?
Now I want to start at 1.
Hit your escape key. Nope.
Now this is crazy. I just had the thing up too.
Yeah, go back to your PowerPoint. Open it back up. Okay, do it again. Open up your PowerPoint and reshare.
Well, for some reason, I got a big number 1 popping up on my screen over here. I don't know what that means. Now I minimize it again. And every time I minimize it, I want to maximize it. And I'm going to try maximize it. But I can maximize it, but I cannot bring in from the beginning. Well, wait a minute. Hold on. Did that do it?
No, you might have it up on your screen. You got to click share screen now.
All right. Let me find it. Now, therein lies my problem.
What?
I can hit share screen, but I can't get the screen on. Okay.
Is this the same presentation you used in Dallas, Casey?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, just a second.
I got a big marker up there that shouldn't even be there.
This what you want?
Yeah, that's the one I want. But I'm
Okay.
trying to find share screen now.
Yeah, I've got it up on. I had it up on my screen.
All right, you got it up there now?
Yeah, I'll just give you the control, and then you can move the PowerPoint slide.
All right.
Okay, at the top up there where it shows
Slideshow.
yeah, look and see where it's hold on. Let me see if I can give you the controls. Just let me know when to click to the next slide. How about that?
Well,
I know it's not what you want to do, but unfortunately, if we can't get it to come up on your computer, then At least you got the slides on the screen.
Wait just a second here. You cannot start screen share while other participant is sharing.
All right, I'll stop and let you come back on. All right, now do it. Okay, now we got you.
Now I lost it.
No, it's there. It's on the screen. We see it.
Oh, you do see it?
Yep.
All right. Well, I wanted to move it over from my left screen to my right screen, and I had it over there, but I don't think it'll work over there.
Can you drag it?
That's what I'm trying to do. Now it's oh, this is crazy. Now I'm going through the video, the whole thing. It's crazy. Well, if you have it on the screen there, I'll just have to look the other way.
Well, I mean, we've got your history slide up on the very first slide.
Oh, it's okay right now?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, let's just see if I can move it from there. All right, sorry guys, about 5 minutes of trying to figure out what's going on here, and just when I think I have it, I don't have it. But anyway, hey, welcome to tonight. I think this is a fantastic opportunity for people like ourselves to share some of this material that we've looked at for over 60 years. And I as I said before, I couldn't agree more with Professor David Denton. And I wanted to let you guys know that if you did not get the opportunity to see our program in Dallas over the last weekend, what a phenomenal program we had. And there's a tremendous amount of history that is going on at that particular time. So if you get an opportunity, David's got, he'll have thumb drives, USB drives later on. But it was a phenomenal history-making thing. And are we getting closer to solving the murder of JFK? Absolutely. All right, history. History is not there for you to like or dislike. It is there for you to learn from it. And if it offends you, even better, because then you are less likely to repeat it. It's not yours to erase or destroy. Study history, separate fears and prejudices from facts, recognize facts from propaganda. Invest energy in fighting for what you believe in, analyze harder where we are going and what you are doing about it. What do you really believe? How much do you really care? In Dallas, as here, I'll dedicate this program to Mae Brussel and John Judge. Facts matter along with complicated truths. Welcome to the fascinating world of research into the 60-year-old murder of President John F. Kennedy. First and foremost, Project JFK CSI Dallas would like to recognize and applaud the works of these research and tireless effort in searching for the truth to the JFK Historical Group, and especially to David Denton, Brian Edwards, Ed Tatro, J. Gary Shaw, David Knight, and Janet and Jimmy Lankoff. President Kennedy never got the opportunity to deliver this speech. We in this country, in this generation, are by destiny, rather than choice, the watchmen of the walls of world freedom. And that's part of the speech he was going to give at the Dallas Trade Mart, the luncheon on November 22nd, 1963. However, on November 22nd, 2023, this is where we are today. We're not sure who's going where, but at the same time, we have a witch burning, and the witch burning is probably democracy. And a quote from Robert Kennedy: "What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence or lawlessness, but love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, and a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country." whether they be white or black. And that was given by Robert Kennedy in Indianapolis on April 4th, 1968, on the murder of Martin Luther King. Seeds of an American Empire, that's the title of my program. American corporate capitalism, international banking, and the international lawyers. Whoever controls the debt controls everything. And obviously, I'm the one presenting it, so here we go. The empire. The reconstruction of Europe and Japan after World War II was the principal driver of America's dominance in the 20th century. Americans today have an opportunity to benefit in a similar way from the development of China, India, and the rest of the developing world. If we are able to rationalize our own debt and solve our supply chain vulnerabilities, we could be in a very strong position to lead billions of human beings hungry for the lifestyle and longevity we enjoy, and in so doing, ensure the American dream for generations to come. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, the United States had become the #1 force to threaten nuclear holocaust. In actual fact, it would seem that during the Cold War, if not during World War II, the United States has become a warfare state built on affluence, a powerful structure in which the interests of big business, the obsessions of the military, and the phobias of political extremists both dominate and dictate our national policy. It also seems that the people of this country are by and large reduced to passivity, confusion, resentment, frustration, thoughtlessness, and ignorance, so that they blindly follow the line that is unraveled for them by the mass media. From 1943, the middle of World War II, to the presidency of John F. Kennedy and his new frontier, the end of 1963, the seeds of an American empire were closing in on its first stage of maturity, 20 years. This development toward maturity was rapidly being contaminated by President Kennedy and his new frontier applications. The caretakers of this maturing American empire had to protect their investment in the United States of Europe and of the world. And they saw Kennedy's new frontier applications as a fast-growing cancer. It had to be removed. The murder of JFK on Friday, November 22nd, 1963, was structured to bring an end to this malignancy. His death sustained the continuation and building of an American empire. On November 22nd, 1963, an assassination network was in place in Dallas. It was constructed of associates of Otto Skorzeny and initiated by the minders of the U.S. government and clandestine groups within NATO. The particulars of the people involved and the events that transpired from this network's activities cannot be dismissed or ignored. The presence of this network is an impossible coincidence. It led directly to the murder of JFK. The total truthful story of President Kennedy's assassination must include all of the evidence and information available. Normal criminal investigations usually pick a suitable suspect, compile all of the evidence that supports that theory, and inevitably runs down dead-end alleys, goes up against brick walls, and is sidetracked by intentionally deceptive and distracted diversions. But everything begins to fall in place once you accept the hypothetical assumption that the assassination of President Kennedy was the result of a covert intelligence operation and standard counterintelligence procedures are employed to understand it. The term deep state has been defined as a type of government made up of potentially secret and unauthorized networks of power, operating independently of the state's political leadership in pursuit of their own agenda and goals. In other words, a government made up of individuals who actually believe that they, and they alone, are of sufficient intellect and ability to rule and reign over the masses. All others are not only unqualified, but need only be attended to, not listened to. Until the work of the Kennedy assassins is undone, presidents will come and go, but the warfare machine and its extensive intelligence tentacles, domestic as well as foreign, will remain in control. The assassination of John F. Kennedy reduced the President of the United States to a transient official, a servant of the warfare conglomerate, the deep state. His assignment is to speak as often as possible about the nation's desire for peace, and while he serves as business agent with Congress for the military and their hardware manufacturers. The program you are watching contains the strongest evidence ever published of a high-level conspiracy by the military-industrial, banking, and intelligence alliance and its ultra-right-wing allies to assassinate President Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. As an author who has spent years researching and writing 3 books on the subject, I state that unequivocally. Dick Russell. The answer and the cause of the murder of President Kennedy lie in the ashes of World War II, the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal, the secret treaty of Fort Hunt, the birth of the Cold War, the creation of NATO, and the foundation of the national security state. Welcome to Dallas, Mr. President. The ending of World War II in Europe, 1945, provided the stage and framework for the murder of President Kennedy in 1963. William Shirer closed his 1960 masterpiece, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, with the judgment that the Nazi regime had passed into history, but we cannot be so confident today. On the contrary, the evidence as of 1990 is that World War II did not end as Shirer believed it did, that Nazism did not surrender unconditionally and disappear, that indeed it finessed a limited but crucial victory over the Allies, a victory no less significant for having been kept a secret from all but a few Americans who were directly involved. What secret, and who were the Americans involved, and why? At the end of World War II, the United States and the Allied powers conducted war crimes and trials at Nuremberg and Dachau. The Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal will find 21 Nazis guilty of these war crimes and sentence all to death by hanging. At the same time the United States was prosecuting Nazis at the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal, the United States military was secretly transporting Nazis to a safe site at Battery Mount Vernon, Fort Hunt Park, Fairfax County, Virginia. When the Allies ended World War II in Europe, Nazi General Reinhard Gehlen presented himself to the nearest POW camp. He spends 2 weeks in this camp awaiting contact from Allen Dulles. The Russians and the Americans are both looking for him. The Russians know he has taken the gold, and the Americans need to protect him. Allen Dulles sends an MI6 OSS British and American intelligence agents to retrieve him. Colonel Clay Shaw picks up General Gehlen and delivers him to the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. within 24 hours. Gehlen is stripped of his Nazi generalship and presented with a 3-star U.S. Army uniform. He repays Hitler's loan of $250 million to John J. McCloy at the Chase Manhattan Bank in New York City, owned by the Rockefeller family. Acting without orders, General Siebert, who was in command of Nazi POW General Reinhard Gehlen, carefully listened to him for several days before informing Eisenhower's chief of staff, General Walter Beadle Smith. Smith and Siebert then continued to develop their relationship with General Gehlen secretly, choosing not to burden Eisenhower with any knowledge of what they were doing in order not to compromise him in U.S. relations with the Soviets. This was the promise of Project Paperclip, the beginning of the Cold War, the creation of NATO, and the development of the United States covert assassinations program, protected through NATO. The establishment of the Galen Org manufactured the construction of America's national security state. The Nuremberg war criminal tribunals eventually will give way to the United States Marshall Plan to rebuild war-torn Europe with an infusion of 13 billion American tax dollars. The building of an American empire from sea to shining sea. The secret treaty of Fort Hunt, Battery Mount Vernon, Fort Hunt Park, Fairfax County, Virginia. What was the secret at the end of World War II? Were Americans involved in keeping a secret, and why? Is the secret treaty at Fort Hunt the World War II mystery? Yes. Were Americans involved in keeping this a secret? Yes. Why? Because the covert arm of the United States military secretly brought to Fort Hunt in Virginia a handful of key Nazi generals who literally transported to the United States thousands of top aerospace and munitions experts from Nazi Germany, along with Nazi Abwehr spies. They were to form the United States corporate leadership and the expertise behind the technological and military advances of our growing military industrial complex for our future. The Dulles and Galen transaction. Bern, Switzerland, 1943. The secret arrangement between the American OSS and the Nazi Abwehr, led by Allen Dulles, second in command of the OSS, U.S. intelligence, and Reinhard Galen, SS General, Abwehr, Nazi intelligence. Americans will gain intelligence access to World War II Nazi intelligence and its infrastructure, later known as the Galen Organization. Or, let's make a deal. There was a secret arrangement between the OSS and the Abwehr. It was OSS Project Paperclip, 1943. Dulles and Galen knew each other and worked with each other since college days at Oxford University. Each of these men were at the top of their country's intelligence services. Each had power and authority, and they both knew that Germany was going to lose the war by 1943. The Americans and the Soviets had already allied themselves to each other in order to defeat the Third Reich. This alliance in the U.S. was condemned by the chiefs of staff and specifically by General Patton. Nevertheless, the U.S. and the Soviets were united. The Secret Treaty of Fort Hunt. The U.S. military created a special unit called the General Staff Cell, centered with G2's Historical Research Section, located at Fort Hunt Park in Virginia, and later the 7th Army Intelligence Center in Wiesbaden Private Quarters Military VIPs. This General Staff Cell was a military secret. Clearly, it is important to know who made the authorized the decisions that led to our national dependency on a network of underground Nazis. Yet, because the relevant documents are still classified, this central part of the Galen story is still cannot be reconstructed. So, if we would even want to try to get access to that, and even get access to the Kennedy documents, we're up a creek. We have no paddle, and we're just floating around waiting for somebody to actually authorize these documents at the end of World War II, and obviously the documents in the Kennedy assassination. Generals, admirals, Nuremberg lawyers, OSS, CIA, and military intelligence, Army G2. From a handful of published books about the Galen Org, none of which cite their sources on this point, we can list only 7 Americans who were said to be involved with Nazi General Reinhard Galen at Fort Hunt. Admiral William Leahy, Chief of Staff and for the Trumans, National Security Advisor. Sherman Kent, head of the OSS Research, Analysis, and a Yale historian. General John T. Magruder, first head of the Army Strategic Services Unit, a vulture of the OSS, General George V. Strong, head of the Army G2 Intelligence, Allen Dulles, second in command of the OSS, General Alex H. Balling, Army G2 Intelligence, and Loftus E. Becker, lawyer with Army G2 Intelligence, Nuremberg War Crimes operator, and first CIA deputy director. How and why did we get to this, the secret treaty of Fort Hunt? Both Allen Dulles and Reinhard Galen, came from affluent families. These families sent their sons to the best school money could buy. Oxford University in England was their finishing school. Both were trained in business, finance, and law. Both Allen and Reinhardt immersed themselves in studying British intelligence, MI5 and MI6. Reinhardt will travel to the United States and finish his apprenticeship for Sullivan and Cromwell, the top U.S. law firm located at Rockefeller Center. His mentor is Sullivan and Cromwell top lawyer and Rockefeller banker, John J. McCloy. Sullivan and Cromwell thrived on its cartels and collusion with the new Nazi regime. Says the firm's chroniclers in 1933-1934, when the Nazis' brutal course was obvious, Dulles led off cables to his German clients with the salutation, Heil Hitler. In 1935, he scribbled a screed for the Atlantic Monthly magazine dismissing Nazi state terrorism as changes we recognize to be inevitable. I.G. Farben, the chemical manufacturer of Zyklon B, poison gas used in the Nazi death camps, and its associated companies were among the Nazi-era corporations that did business with Sullivan and Cromwell. Their chief contact at the firm was an attorney by the name of John Foster Dulles, who became Secretary of State in the Eisenhower administration. Sullivan and Cromwell, LLP, international lawyers, international bankers. These international lawyers and international bankers helped broker a $250 million loan to Adolf Hitler and Germany from Chase Manhattan Bank. This loan, a Rockefeller loan, would help depressed, torn Germany rebuild its infrastructure and the Third Reich. This loan paved the way for a number of American corporations to heavily invest in Nazi Germany. Now remember, this is at the end of World War II, moving through the 1920s to the 1930s, and then that loan helped benefit Adolf Hitler, and here's who it also benefited. Standard Oil, Chase, Mobil, IT&T, Ford Motor Company, Westinghouse, General Electric, JP Morgan, Chase and Company, American corporations. We're not making the world safe for democracy. We're making it safe for capitalism and those who own it. The secret treaty at Fort Hunt and the establishment of Project Paperclip.
Not a problem, man. Oh, not too much. Yeah, I'm gonna be I'm working on finishing up the last little bit on my summation. I'm gonna email that over to you between now and the end of the meeting that we're having.
David, you have to
so
go on
tonight,
mute. David, you got to go on mute. Got it? Okay. The secret treaty at Fort Hunt and the establishment of Project Paperclip. OSS, MI6, Abwehr, Project Paperclip. Project Paperclip was a successful joint American intelligence operation through the Pentagon, military intelligence, the OSS, British MI6, and German intelligence, the Abwehr. It brought to the United States literally thousands of top aerospace and munition experts from Nazi Germany and Nazi Abwehr spies to form U.S. corporate leadership and the expertise behind the technological and military advances of our growing military-industrial complex for our future. This is what we got. Rockefeller had insurance to get his $250 million returned. The best German Nazi scientists come to the United States, 1,000 plus, in aerospace, V1, V2 rockets, NASA. chemical and biological, sarin gas and contaminants, engineering and design, Saturn rockets and space shuttle design, physicist, jet propulsion, 5,000 Abwehr agents, spies to the United States military intelligence, gained access to all Nazi intelligence files and counterintelligence agents. General Reinhard Gehlen to the Pentagon as a 3-star United States Army general. At the end of World War II, General Gehlen will be sent to Germany and become the director of the new German intelligence, BND, for the United States. The United States employs the Gehlen Organization, a black orchestra of spies, a covert intelligence agency under the auspices of NATO. No war criminal prosecution for any of these Nazis. Where is Rockefeller's $250 million loan? General Reinhard Gehlen, Hitler's #1 foreign intelligence officer, will spend the next 1.5 years between 1943 and 1945 depleting Germany of every ounce of gold and Reichsmarks in every German bank. He hides $9 trillion in gold bullion in caves in the Bavarian Alps. Now, that $9 trillion would be estimated as to how much money in today's market of $9 trillion in gold bullion would be. General Gehlen has access to all of the Nazi banks. He is Hitler's right-hand man in foreign intelligence. He is the 3-star general in the SS and can produce secret orders from Berlin to confiscate the gold. He has access to the timing and scheduling of American troop movements through Germany, presence from Allen Dulles. Why? Dulles didn't want the Russians to get the gold, the spoils of war, and Rockefeller's money. After World War II, Reinhard Gehlen, the Gehlen Org, operated under the protection of the U.S. Army G2 intelligence and established a close association with the OSS and later the CIA. In 1947, this alliance with the CIA through NATO, the military orientation of the organization, turned increasingly toward political, economic, and technical espionage against the Eastern Bloc, and the moniker Kulak became synonymous with the Secret Service intrigues. Kulak, a metonym for the BND, German intelligence, just as Langley is for the CIA. Seeds of an American empire. On November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was gunned down in Dallas by Lee Harvey Oswald, shortly after Oswald himself was killed. These events led many to believe that there was a far greater plan at work, with a secret cabal of powerful men, manipulating the public and shaping U.S. policies both at home and abroad for their own interests. Peter Dale Scott believes that beneath the orderly facade of the American government, there lies a complex network, only partly structural, linking Wall Street influence, corrupt bureaucracy, and the military-industrial complex. Here lies the true power of the American empire. This behind-the-scenes web is unelected, unaccountable, and immune to popular resistance. Scott calls this entity the deep state, and he has made it a life's work to write the history of those who manipulate our government from the shadows. Since the aftermath of World War II, the deep state's power has grown unchecked, and nowhere has it been more apparent than that day in Dealey Plaza. Scott marshals compelling evidence that the deep state is now partially institutionalized in non-accountable intelligence agencies like the CIA and NSA. But it also extends its reach to private corporations, to which 70% of the intelligence budgets are outsourced. Behind these public and private institutions is the influence of Wall Street bankers and lawyers allied with international oil companies beyond the reach of domestic law. What took place in Dallas, Texas on Friday, November 22nd, 1963 was an Elm Street ambush in Dealey Plaza. President Kennedy's final frontier. a change of command ceremony, a military-industrial complex upgrade. Brought to you by Lyman Lemnitzer, Alan Dulles, John J. McCloy, James Angleton, General Charles Willoughby, and General Edwin Walker. It goes from Love Field through Dealey Plaza to Washington, D.C., and all the way to the graveyard at Arlington National Cemetery. President Kennedy and his New Frontier administrative policies were aimed at ending the Cold War by 1963. The national security establishment wanted to win the Cold War against the USSR and turn it into a hot war. They wanted to inflict punishing and fatal blows upon our communist hot war adversaries on the battlefield. It was this desire for hot war by so many within the establishment, their belief that conventional proxy wars with the Soviet bloc were an urgent necessity and that nuclear war with the USSR was probably inevitable, to which President Kennedy was so adamantly opposed. Kennedy became a traitor, a national security threat. He became a targeted kill, and they X'd him out for murder. Coup in Dallas, Hank Albarelli Jr., Leslie Sharp, and Alan Kent. Toward the end of World War II, the shifting expedient alliances that joined anti-Nazis with French pro-fascist terrorists and gangsters, anti-communists, anti-monarchists, and allied commandos, all of whom exploited the means of assassination to advance their collective and sometimes contradictory ends. The beginnings described here established the foundation for what eventually evolved into a complex set of interrelated aims, enterprises, individuals, and methods that ultimately triggered the murder of an American president. These events became a kind of assassination incorporated. Enter the Lancelot Project, along with the Military Industrial Banking Intelligence Alliance. It was an off-the-shelf, self-sustaining, standalone entity that could perform an operation outside the United States government and cloak it under the national security state. The Lancelot Project was the removal of President John F. Kennedy from the political scene, permanently and in spectacular fashion. President Kennedy was under a sentence of death when he entered the state of Texas. By the time he arrived at the marketplace called Dealey Plaza in the city of Dallas, the verdict would be finalized. The primary source for coup in Dallas is Pierre and Renee Lafitte's date book. The desktop date book has two authors, Pierre Lafitte and Renee Lafitte. It is eerie to see this come to light after all these years, a template, albeit intentionally cryptic, for the diabolical planning resulting in a coup d'etat that haunts our national psyche. Albarelli, author of previous books probing the U.S. government's efforts to control human behavior, as well as on the JFK case, died of complications from a stroke in June of 2019. He was a zealous researcher who spent years developing the context that underlies the datebook revelations. This traces back to relationships spawned in World War II, including those with Nazi subsequently utilized by U.S. intelligence during the Cold War. Hence, Operation Paperclip. Some of these peoples, identified as apparent conspirators in the datebook, will be familiar to students of the Kennedy assassination. Others are named for the first time publicly. The interlocking connections between Texas oil interests and intelligence operatives are examined in detail, as well as the global reach involving fascist elements threatened by by Kennedy's administration, moved toward a peaceful coexistence with the Soviet Union. The Lafitte Datebook provides us with actual facilitators responsible for the execution of President Kennedy. As an American history professor for the last 45 years, this is what I believe. First off, you need to know the men who are controlling the national security state under President Kennedy in 1963. Our national security state is the men who operated these institutions during Kennedy's administration. Lyman Lemnisser, Joint Chiefs of Staff. Allen Dulles, Director of CIA. John J. McCloy, Finance. General Laureus Norstad, NATO. Admiral Arleigh Burke, Joint Chiefs of Staff. Director Richard Helms, CIA. General Curtis LeMay, Joint Chiefs of Staff. Director James Angleton, CIA. General Edward Lansdale, CIA. Director J. Edgar Hoover, FBI. Director James Rowley, Secret Service. And President of the United States. First of all, Vice President, and then President Lyndon Johnson. Please allow us to introduce ourselves, they say. We are men of wealth and taste. Guardians of the Republic, the deep state. A change of command ceremony, a military-industrial complex upgrade. Again, all the way from Love Field to Arlington National Cemetery. The deep state, the national security state. The process of elimination, November 22nd, 1963. These international lawyers and international bankers from 1943 to 1963 were sowing the seeds of an American empire, legally. By 1963, Pierre Lafitte, James Angleton, Edwin Walker, Otto Skorzeny, Charles Willoughby, and Jack Crichton, they put together what is known as the Lancelot Project. The national security state, the deep state, authorized the use of a covert military intelligence program called Operation Pathfinder. The Pathfinder program was designed by the facilitators of the CIA's JM Way Station in Florida for the purpose of eliminating a national security threat. Cuba's Fidel Castro was the focus of this threat, Operation Pathfinder. Joined the forces of Operation 40, a self-sustaining assassination unit designed by the CIA and U.S. military intelligence, AXI, ACSI, from the Pentagon. AXI is the Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence, one of the most ubiquitous everywhere, but least known military intelligence agencies. With the offices in the Pentagon, this organization answers directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Operation Paperclip was a Cuban task force, assisted by Operation 40, a black ops unit. This task force was exclusively created to murder Fidel Castro. It was a United States institutionalized assassination program. Vice President Richard Nixon and CIA Director Allen Dulles, between 1959 and 1961, had previously assigned CIA Black Operations Covert Intelligence Officer Felix Rodriguez to Texas oil billionaires George H.W. Bush and Jack Crichton to oversee this sensitive project. Sensitive projects are black operations, known as assassinations. Dulles and Nixon had established a Cuban task force because of pressure from American corporations to end their economic suffering from the hands of Fidel Castro. George H.W. Bush and Jack Crichton were billionaire oil magnates. They also had just purchased 13 million acres in Cuba for the oil and gas drilling rights. This entire operation was sanctioned by the Joint Chiefs of Staff at a meeting on September 25th, 1963. It was a contingency blueprint brought into play with the use of an external plan to complement this assassination process. This external plan was entitled Operation Valkyrie. It was an exceptional plan developed by the Nazis in 1944 to assassinate Adolf Hitler. Operation Valkyrie failed. This failed Nazi operation was procured by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to complete or to complement the elimination process of Operation Pathfinder, including the murder of Fidel Castro. At this point in time, Operation Pathfinder was well prepared. It was a well-prepared operational entity. Operation Pathfinder was directed to assassinate Fidel Castro, but was redirected to murder President Kennedy in Dallas. It became the Dallas Operation, November 22nd, 1963. As an alternative to exposing all these passive evidence, which would inevitably lead to a conspiracy within the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and major multinational corporations, these deep state enterprises opted to outsource the murder of President Kennedy. They employed an international corporation with an existing executive action capability. This international corporation was the World Commerce Corporation. It was specifically designed for this purpose. The World Commerce Corporation, the Dallas operation became the Lancelot Project, a national security threat. The facilitators of the Lancelot Project, these are the guys who are going to kill the President of the United States: Pierre Lafitte, James Angleton, Tracy Barnes, Otto Skorzeny, Jack Crichton, Edwin Walker, and Charles Willoughby. These men set into motion the removal of President John F. Kennedy from the political scene permanently and in spectacular fashion. During Hank Albarelli's investigation, an inescapable conclusion emerged. These individuals and their causes they served had been ideologically aligned since World War II, the last 20 years from 1943 to 1963, and in ways that collectively compelled them to regard JFK's removal as both necessary and inevitable. You can find this in Coup in Dallas. Once you see the bigger picture, JFK is simply cannon fodder or collateral damage or a nightmare on Elm Street. President Kennedy's murder was outsourced or subcontracted to the World Commerce Corporation. It was a targeted kill. It's codenamed the Lancelot Project. It was a corporation to hire and train assassins with the power to deploy these instruments of murder for private and or public consumption. These noteworthy JFK scholars and authors have correctly pointed their investigations toward the United States military, the CIA, the FBI, and the National Security State for the murder and cover-up of President Kennedy. This is what most of the National Archives document releases are exposing. Here, established beyond doubt, is that the real perpetrators needed a fall guy to take the rap as a lone left-leaning gunman. The setup of Lee Harvey Oswald began many months before, carefully orchestrated by a cabal of evil geniuses in espionage. One of these was James Angleton, then the chief of the CIA counterintelligence. Another was Charles Willoughby, who formerly served as spy master for General Douglas MacArthur. A third was Otto Skorzeny, Hitler's favorite commando, aided by the U.S. to establish a post-war domicile in Franco's Spain, where he created secret camps to train assassins. All of this is written in Pierre Lafitte's 1963 desktop datebook. Only an all-encompassing ideological remit of those who were involved directly and indirectly could effectively explain the motivation of the plot, the approval, the execution, and the cover-up. Although the concept remains controversial in some quarters, how could so many be involved in or stand by as the coup unfolded? During Albarelli's investigation, an inescapable conclusion emerged. These individuals and the causes they served have been ideologically aligned since World War II, as we said, and in ways that collectively compelled them to regard JFK's removal as both necessary and inevitable. Albarelli believes that these interests and organizations operated in tandem with the development and dramatic expansion of U.S. intelligence, as well as United States banking on a global level, while cloaking themselves in national movements and in distorted religiosity on a global scale to disguise their true aims. In 1963, the state of Texas and the cities of Dallas and Fort Worth played an instrumental role in fulfilling their lucrative commitments with the United States military and Central Intelligence Agency. These affiliations were extremely considerable and resulted in preparing and executing the murder of President Kennedy and its cover-up. Dallas and Fort Worth and the entire state of Texas were sitting on a gold mine and were impatiently waiting for the United States government to declare war on something so that Texas and these cities could cash in on their colossal investments in military and industrial hardware in preparation for another United States foreign military intervention. Texas couldn't live without the military industrial banking intelligence alliance, and neither would President Kennedy. Working model for political assassinations. At the base are the mechanics who literally execute the targets. Above them are the facilitators who, within a multiple strata design, engage in and otherwise support of the development of the plot in both the dramaturgical and jurisprudential senses, and who are responsible for the long-term maintenance of its security systems. At the apex is the deepest shadows. They are the sponsors, the unspeakable incarnate. Colonel Skorzeny, L-shaped ambush, Nazi commando assassination model, November 22nd, 1963. This is what the working model looks like. Main Street to Houston Street to Elm Street. Here is a photograph of the original illustration of an L-shaped ambush from the Nazi German guerrilla warfare manual. Colonel Skorzeny's L-shaped ambush, that was the model used by the Nazis. Skorzeny's masterpiece, the logistical architect for assassinations and hitmen. This is what we believe today is where he would have put the assassins, and they would be used if they needed to. But by the time JFK got to about 6 or 7 seconds into the shots, he was absolutely dead upon impact. And a number of these assassination spots and individuals were never used. Again, international lawyers and international bankers, 1943, Seeds of an American Empire to 1963. And then the Lancelot Project that sustained what these 6 men above started. They were building an empire. The Skorzeny covert networks are linked to the United States CIA assassination capabilities. They developed in 1949 and running the course of the Cold War. The CIA directed assassination activity was originally formed under the Office of Policy Coordination, OPC, Director Frank Wisner, and later Richard Helms, which details are found in the declassified records of the House Senate Select Committee on Assassinations. Skorzeny's operation outlined the creation of his system and how his use as a director of covert action, including assassination, continued to expand through the 1950s. He was utilized by several Western nations, including France, during this same period of time. On March 24th, 1975, an FBI analyst translating foreign mail surveyed a curious handwritten letter received at the Bureau headquarters in Washington, D.C. that had arrived from France only a few days earlier, addressed to the director. The translator summarized the document as a long, rambling, and somewhat incoherent letter concerning, among other things, the assassination of President Kennedy. The writer identified himself as Paul Gluck, explaining in the letter that he understood the FBI was investigating the assassination of Kennedy. He pointed out the tensions that existed between Kennedy and the CIA, and he identified those responsible for Dallas as the CIA agents relieved of their duties in the wake of the Bay of Pigs disaster. Mr. Director, only you can clear Otto Skorzeny of the guilt of being an agent in the Dallas operation with the passive complicity of Allen Dulles. I end here with the hope of seeing the Dallas enigma solved. Paul Gluck, 1975. That document has been hidden for years, and we finally got it released. One of the many hidden, lost, or misplaced, or shredded documents the FBI had on the murder of President Kennedy. Now, that was March 24th, 1975. Mr. Director, only you can clear Otto Skorzeny of this operation. That was 1975. Paul Gluck's letter, United States House Select Committee on Assassination, 77 and 79, nearly 15 years after the publication of the Warren Report, which determined that Lee Harvey Oswald was not part of any conspiracy, domestic or foreign, to assassinate President Kennedy. The House Select Committee on Assassination reached a different conclusion. The committee believes, on the basis of the evidence available to it, that President Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. Another one of the many hidden, lost, or misplaced shredded documents the FBI had on the murder of President Kennedy. This one is dated March 18th, 1964. March 18th, 1964. Finding the FBI's misplaced letter. Author Hank Albarelli is grateful to Mr. Gluck's son, Thierry Bowden, for providing a photocopy of the carbon copy of his father's first letter to Director Hoover, the contents of which Hoover's bureau had every reason to misplace. A letter sent to Director J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI. This was the fourth letter to the FBI, and it was also the last to Hoover. 3 letters were sent before March 18, 1964, and specifically listed some of the same individuals listed in the last letter. March 18, 1964. I understand you are close to the solution of all of the mysteries of President Kennedy's assassination, but I suspect you are without key information. This information concerns the holders of many of the missing cards, Jean Swetra, as well as Jean-Paul Villal, both whom have known to have been in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. Included in this knowledge are Alice Lammy and Gerald Litt, all mentioned before, and extremely distasteful individuals. I am anxious to spell this out for you by coming to Washington, D.C. So at least 4 letters before 1964, at least March of 1864, were gotten by the FBI and named some of the assassins that were related to and through Otto Skorzeny. And what did the FBI do? They lost it, shredded or filed it away in some sort of oval filing cabinet. March 18th, 1964. This letter came into the possession of the FBI less than 4 months after the murder of President Kennedy. The FBI somehow misplaced this letter and 3 other letters sent before March 18th, 1964. One of the foremost turning points in our contemporary American and global history was the cold-blooded murder of President John F. Kennedy and the ramifications it had on the military and industrial and banking institutions at home and abroad, let alone the impact it had on the social values and moral belief system which we created and nurtured within the culture of our American democracy. Those who suffer from conspiracy phobia are fond of saying, do you actually think there's a group of people sitting around in a room plotting things? For some reason, that image is assumed to be so patently absurd as to invite only disclaimers. But where else would people of power get together? On park benches or carousels? Indeed. They meet in rooms, corporate boardrooms, Pentagon command rooms, and the Bohemian Grove, in the choice dining rooms at the best restaurants, resorts, hotels, and estates, in the many conferences at the White House, the National Security Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, or whatever. And yes, they consciously plot, though they call it planning and strategizing, and they do so in great secrecy, often resisting all efforts at public disclosure. No one confabulates and plans more than political and corporate elites and their hired specialists to make the world safe for those who own it. Politically active elements of the owning class have created a national security state that expends billions of dollars and enlists the efforts of vast numbers of people. In modern times, some people have fought back and developed some restraining power against the state, some features of self-protection, or what we call democratic rights. But even in the much vaunted Western democracies, there exists a great deal of arbitrarily state power, whose primary function is to maintain the existing politico-economic structure, be it democratic France or democratic England or democratic Germany or democratic USA or democratic Canada. All these countries have instruments and agencies that act repressively and largely unaccountably, that use surveillance, disruption, judicial harassment, trumped up charges and arrest, covert action, subversion, tax aggression, violence, and even assassination. Every dirty trick in the book. In the middle of these democracies, you have a state within a state, known as the national security state, a most secret unit of misgovernment that is capable of the most unspeakable crimes that are perpetuated against the people of all around the world and against dissidents at home. World War II and the rise of the deep state. The modernization of warfare during World War II forced the United States military to get involved directly with the defense contractors. C. Wright Mills wrote The Power Elite, an insightful 1956 book about the rise of the deep state during the 1950s, according to Mills. Unless the military sat in on the corporate decisions, they could not be sure that their programs would be carried out. Unless the corporation chieftains knew something of the war plans, they could not plan for war production. The generals advised the corporation presidents, and the corporation presidents advised the generals. What is the deep state? An alleged secret network of especially non-elected government officials and sometimes private entities, as in the financial services and defense industries, operating extra-legally to influence and enact government policy. The power of the deep state comes from the experience, knowledge, relationships, insight, craft, special skills, traditions, and shared values. Together, these purported attributes make nameless bureaucracies into a super government that is accountable to no one. This is a scary prospect. Hans Morgenthau discussed the existence of the United States of a dual state. He wrote, the United States includes both a regular state hierarchy that acts according to the rule of law and a more or less hidden secret hierarchy that not only acts in parallel to the former, but also monitors and exerts control over it. This secret hierarchy is able to exert an effective veto over the decisions of the regular state governed by the rule of law. a gangster state. Likewise, what is so compelling about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy is how nakedly the gangster nature of the state is revealed. It is an awakening. To know the truth about the JFK assassination is to call into question the entire state system and the entire social order it professes to protect. This is why for 60 years the mainstream media and the press have suppressed or dismissed out of hand the findings about JFK's death, ignoring or ridiculing the findings of independent investigators. Ruling elites will use conspiracy. They will use overtly legitimizing procedures. They will finance elections, public campaigns, publishing houses, wire services, and academic studies. They will set up liberalish organizations, alternative trade unions. They will use secret surveillance, mobsters, terrorists, assassins, and death squads. They will use every single conceivable thing there is. And when they had someone in the White House like JFK, who was giving them trouble, when they had an agenda to save Southeast Asia from communism, they would even kill one of their own if he hesitated and proved reluctant. And that is a tremendously startling revelation to the American public. A secret government. A secret government is an interlocking network of official functionaries, spies, mercenaries, ex-generals, profiteers, and super patriots who, for a variety of motives, operate outside the legitimate institution of government. Just imagine that Lyndon Johnson's dream to become president came true. Suppose this entity grew into a super secret, self-financing, self-perpetuating organization. Suppose he, LBJ, decided on his own to assassinate President Kennedy. Could Vice President Johnson control it and cover it up under national security? Who would know? Who would ever know? At this point, I would like to, I would be most appropriate to take this opportunity to promote a new book. Book is by Ricky White, as told to J. Gary Shaw and Brian Edwards, Admitted Assassin. This book tells the story of a self-confessed assassin, a soldier employed by a secret organization dedicated to operating under their own dictatorial rules and guidelines. His confession was found in writings and artifacts he had secreted away prior to his sudden tragic death in 1971. His once well-camouflaged employer, now dubbed by many as the Deep State, has slowly been disclosed, recognized, and acknowledged in subsequent years. The term Deep State has been defined as a type of government made up of potentially secret and unauthorized networks of power, operating independently of the state's political leadership in pursuit of their own agenda and goals. In other words, a government made up of individuals who actually believe that they, and they alone, are of sufficient intellect and ability to rule and reign over the masses, and all others are not, only unqualified, but need only to be attended to, not listened to. Please read slowly and carefully about the prime originators of this deep state mentality, followed by their description of this pompous deep state rationale. On the right, we have General William J. Wild Bill Donovan, head of the Office of Strategic Services in World War II, and founding father of the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. To the left, Major Carlton S. Kuhn, an American anthropologist and past president of the American Association of Physical Anthropologists. Major Kuhn wrote a letter to General Donovan about future policies of power and targeted killings. The world is now too small and too tight to permit continuation of the process of trial and error. Therefore, some other power, some third class of individuals, aside from over and above the leaders and the scholars, must exist. And this third class must have a task of thwarting mistakes, diagnosing areas of political world disequilibrium, and nipping the causes of potential disturbances in the bud. Therefore, there must be a body of men whose task it is to throw out the rotten apples, dispose of, assassinate, as soon as the first spots of decay appear. A body of this nature must exist under cover, secretly. It must either be a power unto itself, or be given the broadest discretionary powers by the highest human authorities, the deep state. Major Kuhn was an elite killer and organizer of kill squads for the OSS during World War II and worked directly under William Donovan. The obvious question arising from a chilling proposal are: 1, who elects or selects this high power of third-class individuals? And 2, who elects or selects these highest human authorities who can mandate the broadest discretionary powers to these third-class individuals? It is Gary Shaw's belief that the solution to the perplexing and exasperating question as to who ordered and carried out the assassination of President Kennedy will never be found in government documents. If such documentation ever existed within this government's files and or archives, it was undoubtedly destroyed long ago. At the present time, anyone with reasonable intelligence who looks at the extant evidence without bias and preconceived ideas will be forced to conclude that the president was murdered by a criminal conspiracy, and 2, that none of these conspirators were ever brought to justice. Those who come to the absurd conclusion that 2 lone nuts, and only 2 lone nuts, perpetrated the assassinations on that November weekend in Dallas must possess a learning disability, or they were or are personally involved in the crime and government-led cover-up. They should be dismissed and ignored completely. To argue with such a mindset is, and always will be, an exercise in futility. Roscoe White is this self-confessed assassin, a soldier employed by the secret organization dedicated to operating under their own dictatorial rules and guidelines. Roscoe's confession was found in writings and artifacts as he secreted away prior to his sudden and tragic death, 1971. His once well-camouflaged employer, now dubbed by many as the Deep State, has slowly been disclosed, recognized, and acknowledged in subsequent years. To be clear, this new book, Admitted Assassin, is not about the Donovans or the Kuhns of the world. It is, however, the story of a man who filled the bill of an assassin in a secret assassination program, such as the proposed by Major Carlton Kuhn. Government documents have revealed that an elite and secret apparatus did exist and was operational in 1963. This book is about a man who confessed his role as assassin for just such a secret assassination program, Roscoe A. Rock White. His desire was to try to make right a horrendous wrong. There was an ultra secret organization who took it upon themselves to decide that President Kennedy had to be removed from office. Roscoe White knew who he worked for. He had worked for and been paid by them in the past, and knew what was expected of him. He was familiar with the manner in which he had received his past orders, and he also knew he was supposed to destroy them. However, he didn't, instead hiding them, perhaps for his own protection and security. Later, upon becoming remorseful, he withdrew from the organization and was killed, and his carefully preserved protection and security was left behind to be found by his son, Ricky White. Now, I'm going to extend a little bit into what is known as Larry Rivera's blender program with human geographical positioning. The grassy knoll and Dealey Plaza and the entire north fence line became a shooting gallery. Dallas Police Motorcycle Escort Team, The Horsemen by Larry Rivera, you can see outrider officers, motorcycle officers, Martin, Hargis, Cheney, and Jackson. Dallas police outrider officer Bobby Hargis runs up the north grassy knoll. Officer Hargis parks his motorcycle on Elm Street and runs up to the picket fence on the north grassy knoll and returns to his motorcycle from the picket fence. Beverly Brunson's meticulous research, investigative study, and clarification of the evidence in the murder of President Kennedy from 1966 to 1968 is just starting to be recognized. And Larry Rivera is bringing this out in his Blender program. Brunson's research has outrider or motorcycle police officer Jackson jumping 2 curves, running his motorbike up in front of Abraham Zapruder, dumping the bike while it's still running, and pulls his gun and runs behind Zapruder to hit the corner of the fence on the north grassy knoll. In 2003, Officer Bobby Hargis agrees to an interview with Mike Brownlow as shots were being fired at the presidential limo. The motorcade came to a stop. Officer Hargis ran up the grassy knoll just after shots were fired. He parked his motorcycle and ran in between the presidential limo and the backup Secret Service car, the Queen Mary. He ran to the fence line and saw Officer Roscoe White on the north grassy knoll by the picket fence line. And I need to let you know that Mike Brownlow just recently passed away this summer, 2023. This is what Dallas police officer, outrider police officer Bobby Hargis saw as he quickly parks his motorcycle in the middle of Elm Street and runs up the north grassy knoll, along with Dallas police officer outrider Doug Jackson. They confront Roscoe White behind the picket fence, acting like he has this area under control as he searches for a shooter. Bobby Hargis runs to the picket fence along with Jackson and Hargis. Dallas police officers, motorcycle outriders rush up the north grassy knoll in pursuit of shooters behind the picket fence. Are these 2 Dallas motorcycle cops the only ones who saw shooters behind the picket fence on top of the north grassy knoll? ONI photographer Phil F. Spainhauer and admitted assassin Roscoe White. White marks in the Mary Mormon film with an X where he was shooting. Spainhauer, standing next to him, is filming. Spainhauer, ONI photographer Phil F. Spainhauer. And the circle here represents where he was standing. Dallas police outrider Doug Jackson. And this is Jean Hill's fingerprint. She was extracting the Polaroid photos from Mary Mormon's camera and placed them in her red raincoat pocket. She would rub some photographic emulsion on each photo to help in developing the process. Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman is holding his Secret Service manual in front of his face while Kennedy is under fire. Why is he doing that? Well, we do now know that the Gallers who went in to embalm the president in Washington, D.C., when they removed all the blood that was necessary to remove from President Kennedy and then filled his body with embalming fluid, saw a number of holes in President Kennedy's face squirt out the embalming fluid. They immediately rushed to that and found out that he had shards of glass in his face. What from? Probably from the window that was exploding in front of him and hitting him possibly in the throat. These are the eyewitnesses that actually saw and heard shots being fired. Beverly Oliver, Roscoe White himself, because he was there shooting and he admitted that. Patrick Dean, Phil Spainhauer. Gordon Arnold says he was an ear witness and then later saw a Dallas policeman shove a rifle in his face. Bobby Hargis, outrider motorcycle. Doug Jackson, eyewitness teacher Gene Hill, eyewitness from the railroad tower Lee Bowers, and eyewitness worker at Ling Temco Ed Hoffman. The book that we wrote was called Beyond the Fence Line. And at this particular point, what I am going to do is I'm going to stop right there because I've opened this up a little bit for very possibly Brian Edwards to talk about his program later on. So David, I'm going to turn that over. If there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Okay, Casey, thank you. That was a great presentation. Lots of great information. That leads right into where we're going to go next. We're going to have Brian come on, and I want him to talk about the Ricky White panel that we had, the Roscoe White panel that had Ricky White, Bill Klaber, J. Gary Shaw, and Brian himself. So it was, I will say one thing, it was one of the best panels that we had in quite some time. You could have heard a pin drop during that time. Matter of fact, me and Brian were just sharing the chat log back and forth. There was not anything being said in the chat log. And the reason why for that was everybody was hanging on every word and wanted to, to hear what Ricky had to say. So Brian, why don't you go ahead and start off with how we put that together, the launch of it, and then where we ended up with on Saturday night, having Ricky on the panel.
Okay. First of all, I'm just going to do, okay. I'm going to just do a trailer like they do in the movies. Give you a place that you can order the book. It's called Admitted Assassin. It's pre-release discount through December 31st of this year. You can order it directly from Pinnell Unlimited. You can go right to the website and order it. The book will be done. The book will be available within the second week of December. We're just in the final stages of editing now, so we're really close. It's a complicated story. It's an intriguing story. I wanted to just share with you of course, I'm having issues. On Saturday, Ricky White agreed to come from Paris, Texas, and agreed to sit with us on our on our panel. We discussed his story. William Klaber, as you can see, are you seeing that, David? Am I sharing my screen?
No, you're not sharing your screen. Make sure you click share screen.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Now we got you.
Okay,
Please, yeah.
there's Bill Klaber on the left. He was a journalist who interviewed Ricky's mother prior to her passing in 1991. And we heard her voice tell stories about her relationship with her husband, Roscoe White, and their relationship together with Jack Ruby. It was very enlightening that those three folks interacted quite frequently with each other. In fact, Geneva told us on audio tape that Jack Ruby was at their house many times having dinners, and Jack would bring his dogs and let their children, let Ricky and his brother Tony play with the dogs. In 1990, I attended a conference at a national conference in Dallas, and Larry Howard of the JFK Assassination Information Center asked me if I'd be interested in watching a movie excerpt from a documentary that had been done by television station in Midland, Texas. It's called the West Texas Connection, and it highlighted the 12-part series about Ricky White's father, Roscoe White, and basically said that he was an assassin, and many interviews with Ricky. And so to be honest with you, it scared the hell out of me. I'm former law enforcement, and here's a story about a guy who was a cop at the time and shot and killed President Kennedy. It was very eye-opening and very, again, something I would never have thought of. And in 2018, 2018, Gary Shaw asked me to help him write the Roscoe White story. And so we've been working on it ever since. And Roscoe's an interesting man. He died suddenly. Why isn't this advancing? This is Ricky at the conference on Saturday. 60 years old. I'm sorry, he's born in 1960. His birthday was on the same day as the day that Jack Ruby shot Oswald. And Ricky tells a fascinating story of he was about ready to blow out the candles on his cake at their home in Dallas, and suddenly his father appeared at the door in uniform, police uniform, packed the family up in a car and drove to Paris, Texas, and dropped the family off. Didn't see him for 3 days, and Ricky celebrated his birthday with his grandparents instead of his father. So when Roscoe came back, nothing was said. Nobody asked any questions. They went on life as usual. And 2 years to the day that Roscoe began his employment with this police department, he quit and went to work as a assistant manager of a drugstore, which is very interesting. That's a whole chapter of the book. We don't know why, but it's interesting that he would do that. In 1971, after they came back from Arkansas, they moved to 3 different houses in that span of 2 years. They lived in 3 different places. And on September 23rd, 1971, Roscoe was a shop foreman at this business that was at the time M&M Equipment Company, where they worked on large industrial equipment, forklifts and backhoes and road graders and that sort of thing. On that Thursday afternoon, Roscoe asked one of his employees if he would help him with some welding after hours, because there was a tractor that had to get out or whatever it was. And the employee agreed that he would help, and Roscoe lit up a acetylene torch, and it blew up. Secondary explosion tipped over a can of highly volatile solvent, and Roscoe was basically burned alive in that shop. He died 24 hours later at Parkland Hospital, of all places, and the cause of death was extensive third-degree burns of the body. His minister visited him while he was in the hospital, and basically got a confession, not a deathbed confession, but he got a confession that he had killed people on foreign and domestic soil for the government, and he was in remorse about that, and he wanted to get out. He had turned his life around and became a Christian, and told the people that he worked for that he didn't want to do that anymore. And 3-4 weeks later, he was killed. So Ricky was 11 years old at the time and didn't know that that his father was involved in any of these kind of activities. Obviously, he didn't share that with his son, but in 1976, a family friend contacted him and his wife in Paris, Texas, and said, "Hey, I've got to tell you that the federal government is going to name your father as a shooter of President Kennedy." And of course, Ricky didn't believe him, and he told of his knowledge of his Roscoe's involvement in the assassination and other programs. And so he let it go, didn't think too much about it, didn't share it with any of family members, and just left it as it was. In 1990, 1982, Ricky's grandfather had passed away, and they went to the funeral in Paris, Texas, and Ricky found or refound his father's footlocker, his military footlocker, inside this shed at the at his grandparents' property. And inside that footlocker was memorabilia from his father's time in the Marine Corps. And that's where we believe he was recruited into this organization. We don't know. He didn't come right out and tell the minister he worked for CIA or, you know, the mafia or whatever it might have been. But he just said, you know, I've done things I shouldn't have done, and I don't want to do that anymore. So Ricky reclaimed his father's footlocker. This is his father's footlocker, and inside that was memorabilia from his father's time in the Marine Corps, letters from home, photographs, Dallas Police Department photographs, first generation prints of photographs, and Lee Oswald's autopsy, and evidence photos, and all kinds of letters. Ricky at that time didn't know what all this meant, but he found also if you can see my pointer, there's a bank bag here, a zippered green bank bag with the words Wynwood State Bank on it. Inside that bank bag were 2 keys that Ricky found, and remembers reading in the diary that his father had left some money for the family in case something would happen to him. And Ricky and his mother went to the bank 4 times trying to get that money. The first time they went, the bank representative opened the vault and said that it showed them that there was bearer bonds to the amount of $250,000 in bearer bonds. And bearer bonds were not something that everybody would ever want, because they're not traceable. That would be almost like it was, you know, it was untraceable, so that nobody could know who paid for them. So Ricky believes that this was money sent to his father to use, you know, in the future in case something happened to his father, that he could have that as an inheritance and take care of his family. He over time, the FBI got wind of this. They without even talking to Ricky, the FBI initiated surveillance on Ricky and his wife, because they felt that Ricky was some type of threat. And if I could ever ask anybody any questions, I would ask these 2 agents who were involved in this, what crime did they commit, or were you believing that they were involved in, that would initiate federal surveillance on private citizens? So we don't know what prompted them to do that, but Ricky was surveilled for 2 days, and we have the logs from these agents. There's the printout and handwritten logs of the surveillance over a 2-day period. At one point, they followed the wrong car. They got the wrong address, went to a wrong business. They're basically Keystone Cops on steroids. In 1990, Ricky had been told that his mother reminded him that he had helped his father build an addition onto the grandparents' home in Paris, Texas. So Ricky went there thinking there might be some other clues, and sure enough, Ricky found in the attic a steel military grade canister with the number 1965 and a series of numbers and letters, and imprinted on the back side of this. I should have taken a picture of it, but I didn't. But here's the canister. And in the canister, Ricky found, I don't know why this is not advancing, Dave. Any clues why this isn't advancing?
Are you, did you go in there and click, you should be able to just put your cursor on one of the pictures, double click it, and then click slideshow from current slide, and it'll go.
I did that. Okay, let's try it again. Anyway, so Ricky found inside this here we go. Inside that canister was this plastic sheet. It's almost like laminate plastic, but it was very brittle. And it was wrapped around on the inside of this canister, and there was writing on all three of these. These pages are about the size of a small legal pad. And Gary Shaw was one of the people who found it and started reading the text of these documents. Okay, why is that not moving? All right, well, let's do it the old-fashioned way. Sorry. There are the cables. There is the original cables. They're typewritten in plain text. And each one of them, the heading is the same, Navy Int. I assume that means Navy Intelligence, Code A, Remark Data, Roscoe's serial number is 166-6106. That's how we know that that's Roscoe's information, that this was sent to Roscoe. And Roscoe's code name, according to his diary, was Mandarin. And these three texts are sent, and this was in February, second one was in September, and the last one was in December. The texts of these cables basically they're like direct orders to Roscoe. And these are printed exactly as they appeared on the documents. Foreign affairs assignments have been canceled. Excuse me. The next assignment is to eliminate a national security threat to worldwide peace. Destination will be Houston, Austin, or Dallas. Contacts are being arranged. Orders are subject to change at any time. Reply back if not understood. And this man, the addressor, is a man named C. Bowers, and whether that's his real name or not, we don't know. But each one of these cables has this code at the bottom. Reference, rifle code, AAA, destroy on. Destroy on means to me that after he reads it, learns of his assignment, that he is to destroy this cable. But he didn't do that because it was found intact inside that canister. The second cable was addressed September 63 here at the top. It says remarks Mandarin, Dallas destination is chosen, your place hidden within the department. That tells us that we're talking about the police department, because Roscoe was hired shortly after September 63 by the Dallas Police Department. It says contacts are within this letter. We take that to mean that somewhere in here is a code word or a code name for his contact if he has any questions or issues. It says continue on his plans. Again, C. Bowers with rifle code AAA destroy. And the final one was dated in December. Remember, the Kennedy assassination took place in November. This one is remarks Mandarin code C. The other two were code A. I don't know what C means. I guess that's completed. I don't know. We're just speculating. Stay within the department. Witnesses have eyes, ears, and mouths. You know what to do of the mix-up. The men will be in to cover all misleading evidence soon. Stay as planned. Wait for further orders. That tells us that we interpret that is that Roscoe's orders were to stay on the department, pay attention to the investigation, find out what's going on, who's telling what, who the witnesses are, and if there's some witnesses that need to be talked to again forcefully, then Roscoe would be in charge of doing that. We believe that also in that canister, Ricky found a green textbook. I'll show you that. A green textbook that is a shorthand textbook by Graham from the 20s. Excuse me. A dictation course textbook. And inside the front cover, it's imagine a book, a little thin book. Several of the pages have been ripped out of it from the front. This book was turned upside down, and newspaper clippings were clipped into or taped or glued into this scrapbook that Roscoe made. And and there was margins along the pictures or along the border of the page that he would write, make some comments and put codes and series of numbers and letters that mean nothing to us. But at the top of this inside cover, it says R.A. White 166-6106. That's Roscoe's name. That's Roscoe's signature, and that's his military ID. So there's no doubt that this belonged to Roscoe Anthony White. Now, why he kept this scrapbook, we don't know. Inside the back cover is this. 28 people died from witness program. Take out the rest of people later. He spelled it later as Latter. And then Roscoe Anthony White here at the bottom. The series of codes, numbers, dashes, and numbers. We have no idea what they mean, but at the bottom here, again, he writes his name, Roscoe Anthony White. So there's no doubt who this belongs to. What's interesting is the witness program. Does that mean that he heard, stories that people were telling different versions of what happened, and he was to eliminate them? Your guess is as good as ours. We're not real sure. But some more of the intriguing pictures in the book. This is page 4. Remember, this is upside down and backwards, so it starts from the back, goes forward. This is the 4th page from the back. Obviously, it's a picture of the Kennedy brothers, and in the bottom here, you can see Roscoe's hand now got the head, going tail later. I guess that means that they got the head of the dog. Now they're going after the tail of the dog. And there's pencil marks across the heads of both of these from here all the way across to Robert Kennedy. Roscoe made it a point of not only drawing on the pictures, but also making comments about the pictures, what's in the pictures. This is a famous picture of Lieutenant Day with the Dallas Police Department holding up the rifle that they found in the book depository, and Roscoe wrote in his own hand, 7.65 Mauser, our gun, used, kill President Kennedy, November 22, 63. That's all of what's written here. Ricky's verified that is his father's handwriting on every page that we showed him. Now, we don't know what this means. Only Roscoe knew what it means, but it's speculated that we think that this 7.65 Mauser was the gun that killed Kennedy. This is not a 7.65 Mauser. It's a 6.5 Mannlicher carbine. So what is Roscoe saying? I don't know. Is he saying that this is a lie and our gun was used? Our gun, 7.65 Mauser. Ricky remembers his father had a 7.65 Mauser bolt action rifle, but Ricky didn't know the significance of it, and he sold it to an uncle, and we don't know where that rifle's at. I would love to have had that rifle do a little ballistics check, but we'll never have that again. And here's the other interesting photograph. Again, in the book, the next page, the 3 pages away, is the Mormon photograph clipped out of the newspaper. And up here, it's hard to see on this, but this is the best copy of it. There's a circle with an X through it right up in this area here. There are 4 pencil marks across the motorcycle and the car, run right through Kennedy's head. I don't know if that means there were 4 shots fired or 3 shots fired or whatever, but Roscoe wrote in his own hand, Mandarin kills K, uses 7.65 Mauser in assassination. I don't know how much more clear you can have of an assassin who admits that. Granted, this could be a big hoax. There's no denying that, but Ricky White could not have put this together. If you'd met Ricky, and David and Casey can attest to the fact that he's not smart enough to put this together, and no more that he can explain the origin of the universe as far as how to put this thing together with all these artifacts. And this final page that we have in the book, it says, this is a picture of Perry Raymond Russo, the key witness in the prosecution of Clay Shaw in the Jim Garrison trial. And Roscoe had written, trial doesn't surprise me. To the right of the photo, Roscoe wrote, big mouth, you talked after all. Now, if this is a witness elimination book, Roscoe did not, this guy lived a good old life until he was, in his 60s. He was not killed violently. I think he died of natural causes, but why Roscoe put his picture in the book, total speculation. We don't know why. Casey mentioned Officer Hargis that ran up the knoll and saw Roscoe White on the knoll immediately after the assassination. To me, that's pretty good. That's pretty good nail on the coffin, is if you want to use that kind of term. But we believe that Roscoe White's story is true. We think that Ricky is basically providing the information for us, and we're happy to have his story out there, because he's lived with this since the 1990s, and he hadn't been in public since 1991 when he gave a press conference at the JFK Assassination Information Center. So we were very pleased that he was able to present himself to the conference, and we got everybody thanked him for coming. And so if you're interested in buying the book, it's available now. I think we're selling it for $19.95 before the 31st. After that, it'll be $24.99. You can go to the website, Pinnell Unlimited, and order your copy today. That's all I got, David.
Hey, why don't you go ahead and throw up that picture that shows the place where they can go on. You got that handy? Yeah, there we go. So if you want to order that book, and it's a good book, I can't wait for it to come out myself. So be sure to go to PinnellUnlimited.com and get your copy before they sell out the first printing and they have to go for a second printing. So thank you for sharing that, Brian. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up our event here. I want to say that this is kind of like I said earlier, this is the eve before what would have been the assassination tomorrow, 60 years in the making of the anniversary here, why you guys are here tonight. And why it still matters is the JFK assassination, we've not been given the exact, we've been given two different official theories, the Warren Commission report and the House Select Committee on Assassinations. But it's the government that has sent out their view, okay, their official findings. And unfortunately, with what's coming out of the documents now, what we've seen in the films, the photographs, the eyewitness testimony, and witnesses that were not interviewed that have come forward 60 years later, and during the last 60 years, we know that there was something more that happened than what was just stated of Oswald, 3 shots, and, lone nut assassin. There's more to the story than that. And it's up to the research community, which is the first, second, third generation researchers. But I want to throw this out. I said this at the banquet the other night. It's not just the researchers that are doing this right now. We have to get younger generation researchers involved. People that they don't have the information that we have. They've not been studying this case as long as we have. But we have to make it to where they want to take over. We're doing new things with new technologies, looking at the case with fresh eyes. I know that I just finished up a book with Larry Rivera, bringing out a new digital published book of the JFK Horseman. This book is phenomenal. It was available at the conference. It will be up on our website, hopefully by the end of this week, for ordering online. It'll be available on a USB flash drive and also a Google Drive digital file that you can order and have immediately. You don't have to wait for snail mail for it to get there to you. It's got 1,100 photographs. We just added a brand new chapter to it. There's audio and video. There's some PDFs that's going to be on that drive. We had a great response at the conference with that, and it's work that we're all doing, but in particularly the technology side part of it, Larry Rivera and myself are spearheading that. Why are we doing this? Well, it's what we didn't have, 60 years ago, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, or even, before that. We are doing new advancements in getting this case looked at. And it's these new advancements, this new technology is what's making, it's on the line of what the younger generation is involved with. They don't read books anymore. So, some of them read books, but most of the majority of the younger generation do not. So we have to figure out a way how to get that book and that research materials in front of them. And that's why I'm starting to do digital publishing now. It gets them to interact with the research materials. It gets them to interact with the case. And if we don't want this to die with us, And I mean, I just turned 49 on Saturday. I know I've been researching this since 1989 when Casey got me into it as a middle school student. But unfortunately, this case, even back then, the history book stated Oswald did it. He did it alone. The accused assassin, case closed. No more need to look at it. They don't even talk about the JFK assassination in school anymore. It's a footnote in history. It's a footnote in the K through 12 especially. It's a footnote in their textbooks. And it's up to people like myself, like Brian, Casey, David Denton at OCC. It's up to us to get, the younger kids, the youngsters into this. We don't want it to become something of a past history that nobody researches anymore. Why? Because we don't have the truth yet. We're sure as hell not going to get it from the government. It's up to us to piece this together and put the official story from our side, as this was not a lone nut assassin, but this was the act of a conspiracy out there for the world to see. I like to say that, around the November 22nd every year, there seems to be something new that comes out, whether it's a new book, a new film. They talk about it on programs on the news stations. There's still an outlet for us to go to, and if there's not an outlet, we make it, like we do right here, like what we're doing on YouTube and what we're doing in the conferences. We gather together because this is not a story that's going to go away. Our research doesn't end just because the 60th anniversary happens tomorrow. We did end it at the 50th. We're not going to end it at the 60th. I don't know how much longer we all have left, but we're going to hang in there and continue this fight until we have all the information out there. Because if we stop doing what we're doing and we leave it as it is, unanswered, without a definitive answer, then my kids, their kids, they're going to look at it going, well, you know what? They couldn't figure it out during the time they were here, so why the hell would we care about it now? Well, they have to care. We care. It's our history, and this is a history not only of the United States, but as a world. On November the 22nd, 1963, that day we lost our innocence. The world changed. It wasn't the same anymore. They struck down our president on the streets of downtown Dallas, Texas, in broad daylight in front of a crowd of, hundreds of thousands of people, but particularly hundreds of people in Dealey Plaza. We can't let them get away with the fact that, they've doctored photographs, they've stolen films, they have given us their official finding that we know for a fact isn't correct, and it's not the whole story. So we have to continue the fight, and that's our call to arms, is to continue what we're doing, keep speaking about this, don't let it die, and it's up to us to carry on the legacy, and the legacy of JFK and his assassination, but the JFK, the man himself. He's not just a guy that got assassinated. He was the leader of our country. He was a father, a brother, a husband. There's more to JFK than just the assassination, but we have to figure out about the assassination to carry on his legacy. Brian, you sent me a chat. You said you wanted to add something else here real quick.
Yeah, I was just going to say, thanks, David. I was just going to say, anybody that orders the book before the 31st, every copy that we send out that has been ordered before that day will be autographed by all three authors, including, or all Gary and myself, plus Ricky White. So that is an incentive right there, I think, to get it, because Ricky's pretty self-contained individual. He's not out, going to do a book tour or a book signing event. So we've convinced him to at least autograph as many books as we can, and so we decided to cut it off. If anybody buys it before the 31st, all three of our signatures will be on it. So That's all I had to say. Yeah.
No, thank you, Brian. That is a good thing to comment on and to put out there. Ricky was a very, I want to say this, Ricky was a very genuine person. He was emotional when he was up there on the stage at the table discussion during the panel to speak about, you know, what he went through as Roscoe's son and Geneva's son. I know just when we were playing the audio recordings that Bill Klaber did the interviews with Geneva, he was getting choked up, and rightfully so. I mean, that was his mom on that on those audio recordings. And I know Brian had tears in his eyes too. I got a chance to you know, get out in the hallway there, and not only did I get a picture with him, but I got a chance to shake his hand, thank him for coming out to the conference. I know he was concerned, you know, about speaking in front of an audience. He made the comment that the audience that we had there, we were sold out for the conference. So hey, I want to say good for that. But you know, he hadn't spoken in front of an audience of that size. Even back in 91, I believe it was 1991, when he was down there at the Assassination Information Center at the press conference. He had a small group of people to talk to, and they were not the most polite to him. They attacked him. And you know, a lot of years have passed since then. But you know, he did really good with it in informing us, telling us his story. And he spoke from the heart, guys. You know, I mean, he was, yeah, there we go. The pre-release discount there, and order again from PenealUnlimited.com. You know, I want to say this, this evening was great spending with everybody. And for those of you on YouTube watching this in replay, I wish you could have been here in person, live with us on Zoom. But I appreciate you guys checking out our videos on YouTube. Be sure to hit the like, subscribe, so that way you know when new information is coming out. I do want to let you know that in case you haven't heard before, I'll say it again: the Truth series of 34-hour film footage that I shot over the last, it was like from 1991 all the way until about 2010, 2015. That film footage is going to be out on our website and on YouTube. It's Project JFK CSI Dallas's gift to the research community. And it's also, hey, it's a Christmas present for you guys. So I know it will be available by Christmas. And again, you can go on YouTube. You can go on our website. Our website's projectjfk.com. Be sure to check out the jfkhistoricalgroup.com website, which is, you know, David Denton's group. We both sites have a donate button. You know, it's the donate button for, you know, if you like what we're doing. On the JFK side, you want to see our shows continue to go. You know, it's kind of like PBS. I mean, we're not having a telethon here, but, you know, we can definitely use the donations to keep the lights on and keep doing what we're doing. I know the donations that go on to David Denton's site helps with getting students involved, taking them to conferences. So, you know, please, if you have an opportunity to donate, you know, a little goes a long way. We are putting out a conference in the spring. It's going to be in Kansas City. It looks like it's going to be at my community college that I attend. We've got to pay for that, guys. And it's, you know, we don't have a conference if we don't have our audience number one. You know, if we didn't have an audience, we wouldn't have a conference. If we didn't have speakers, we wouldn't have a conference. I know that me and Brian and Casey and David Denton, we can all get up there and talk for hours. Sometimes we go a little longer, but you know, we want to get a good student symposium going on to get the younger kids involved, and you know, the younger students. I know at the community college we have students from the age of 18 to 80, about 3,000 of them. So I'm hoping that we'll have a large turnout to get them involved to stop in. If they can spend the entire, I think we're going to have it for 2 days, like a Friday, Saturday. It is open to the public. We're gonna do it live in person, and then of course we'll have Zoom patched in as well. More details of that will be coming out after Christmas, sometime in January. We'll be having that conference in April, end of April, 1st of May. But more details will come out. If you subscribe to our website, you'll know when changes are made. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you will know when the videos are playing and which ones are coming out new. So be sure to hit like, subscribe, and subscribe to the website. Again, projectjfk.com. I want to thank everybody that was in attendance tonight. I want to thank David Denton for spearheading this event. This was his brainchild, and I came along for the ride. I want to thank Casey Quinlan for presenting. I want to thank Brian Edwards for giving his information and his story about what took place at the conference. Good jobs, guys. With that, I believe we're going to go ahead and bring this to a close unless anybody has some questions. Let me look here in the chat log and see if anything else has come up. No, James, the videos are always on YouTube. I've had real good luck with not having our videos taken down. I don't post anything on Rumble or BitChute, but we like I say, we've been going great. I make sure that our videos are posted. We have backups obviously, but we don't seem to have any issues with having our videos on YouTube. As a matter of fact, we get quite a few good comments, and it's a good spot for us to be. So we're going to continue hosting our videos on YouTube. Yeah, I tell you what, James, why don't you, you've got a pen and paper, write this down. You can contact me at projectjfk@yahoo.com. That's projectjfk@yahoo.com, or you can give me a phone call or a text, 913-980-JFK1. That's 5351. I'm going to be busy this evening getting some stuff done after wrap up here on the show, but give me a call tomorrow. And let's see about what your idea is there is to Rumble or to use Rumble and BC to simulcast and stream over there. Tony, I want to say thank you again. That was a great comment. Yeah, a lot of people said that our conference that we had in Dallas this year was probably the best we put on in 20 years. Memphis was a lot of fun. To go down there and to go to a new area that we had never put on a conference at before. I know that after the museum opens back up from their renovations, me and David have already talked. We were talking about going back down there around 2025 to put on another spring conference. I did a presentation on Medgar Evers down there that was picked up by getting some input back from the Memphis State School Board that I'm working on next to get my presentation a little bit more polished. It'll be a longer presentation, but something they can teach in the schools because Medgar Evers is important to the civil rights movement. Of course, it sort of started with him as far as the civil rights assassinations. I mean, he was assassinated prior to MLK and Malcolm X. And his story had not been talked about at our conference other than in passing. So I took it upon myself to do the presentation on him. I'm glad I did. I'm working with Ryan Jones to see if we can get a few tweaks made here and there. The Memphis videos will be coming out, just so you know. I'm going to make it here, make it now. They were going to be available at Dallas. I'm about a week and a half behind from getting those completely finished. Hey guys, I'm in school and I'm wrapping up finals as soon as we get done with Thanksgiving. So let me get through that. And as soon as those are available, they'll be on the website. Again, they're going to be available for digital download and also USB flash drives. I do want to throw this out there. I don't make DVDs anymore. Time it takes to make those and how long they actually really last for it's easier to just do it on flash drives. Plus, we can get it to you quickly without having to sit there and charge the hell out of shipping and handling cost and the time it takes and the money it takes to produce them. So flash drives are the way we're going. It's the mark of the future. That's where we're headed to. So we got to stay current. But with that, I want to thank everybody again that's still with us. Have a great evening. Have a great Thanksgiving. And be sure to look on the website because the Journey meeting will be happening in December. We are not going to have a lull. We will have one in December. I do not have the exact date, but I know it will definitely be after my finals. And that's the week of the 3rd and the 11th. So it'll be after the 11th of December, but it'll be before Christmas. We will have a Journey meeting. So be sure to sign up for that. Come take part in it. And I'm sure that we'll have a lot of great stories to share from the 3 conferences that just took place. That'll be kind of a conference wrap up next month. And where we're going to go for the new year. So you don't want to miss that. Definitely hit us up next month for the Journey meeting. Again, I'm David Knight with Project JFK CSI Dallas. Thank you again for your time tonight. And I hope that you guys got something out of this. And we'll see you again next month. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and if you get a chance, donate to the cause. Have a great evening, everybody.